Welcome to Boring History, where we explore the less glamorous side of the past to help you drift off to sleep. Tonight, we're delving into the unsettling world of medieval medicine. Prepare yourself for a journey through time, where the cures were often worse than the ailments themselves. In the dimly lit chambers of medieval Europe, medical practices were a far cry from the sterile hospitals we know today. Imagine a world where your local barber doubled as a surgeon, and leeches were considered a cutting-edge medical tool. This was the reality for those living in the Middle Ages, a time when superstition and limited scientific knowledge shaped the approach to healing. As we explore this topic, you'll discover why a simple toothache could be a death sentence, and how the color of your urine could determine your treatment. We'll uncover the bizarre beliefs that guided medieval doctors, from the theory of the four humors to the influence of astrology on medical diagnoses. But before we dive deeper into the gruesome details, let's set the scene. Picture a bustling medieval town, its narrow streets filled with the pungent odors of unwashed bodies and open sewers. In this environment, disease was rampant, and the average life expectancy hovered around a mere 30 years. It's against this backdrop that we'll examine the medical practices that were meant to heal, but often harm. Throughout our journey, we'll encounter bloodletting, trepanation, and peculiar herbal remedies that would make modern pharmacists cringe. We'll also meet some of the key figures who shaped medieval medicine, from Hippocrates and Galen to the often overlooked contributions of Islamic scholars. So settle in and prepare to be both fascinated and slightly disturbed as we unravel the mysteries of medieval medicine. By the end of this audio journey, you'll likely find yourself grateful for modern healthcare, even with all its imperfections. And who knows, the thought of leeches and bone saws might just be enough to lull you into a peaceful slumber. Let's begin our exploration of why medicine was truly terrifying in medieval times, starting with the fundamental beliefs that guided medical practice in this era of superstition and limited scientific understanding. As we delve deeper into the world of medieval medicine, it's crucial to understand the historical context that shaped medical practices during this period. The Middle Ages, spanning roughly from the 5th to the 15th century, was a time of great change and upheaval in Europe. Following the fall of the Roman Empire, much of the medical knowledge accumulated by ancient civilizations was lost or fragmented. The once thriving centers of learning in Alexandria, Athens, and Rome fell into decline, and with them, centuries of medical advancements. In the vacuum left by the collapse of classical civilization, the Christian Church emerged as a dominant force in medieval society. Monasteries became the new centers of learning and medical care, with monks serving as both spiritual guides and healers. The Church's influence on medicine was profound. Disease and illness were often viewed through a religious lens, seen as divine punishment for sin or the work of demons. This perspective significantly impacted how medieval people approached health and healing. However, it's important to note that medieval medicine wasn't entirely without merit. Many monastic orders maintained herb gardens and produced remedies that had genuine medicinal properties. The problem lay in the limited understanding of how these remedies actually worked. Another crucial factor in medieval medicine was the prevailing theory of the four humors. This concept, inherited from ancient Greek medicine, proposed that the human body was composed of four fundamental substances: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. According to this theory, good health depended on maintaining a balance between these humors. Illness was believed to result from an imbalance, leading to treatments that aimed to restore equilibrium through practices like bloodletting or purging. The four humors theory also tied into the concept of the four elements earth, air, fire, and water, and their corresponding qualities of hot, cold, dry, and moist. This framework influenced everything from diagnosis to treatment in medieval medicine. It's worth noting that while we now know this theory to be incorrect, it provided a systematic approach to understanding the human body and disease. In a world without microscopes or understanding of germ theory, it offered a comforting sense of order and explanation. The medieval period also saw the rise of universities, particularly from the 12th century onward. These institutions began to formalize medical education, though it was still heavily based on ancient texts rather than empirical observation. One of the most influential medical texts of the time was the Canon of Medicine by the Persian physician Avicenna. This comprehensive work combined Greek and Islamic medical knowledge and remained a standard medical text in Europe until the 18th century. However, the reliance on ancient authorities sometimes hindered progress. The works of Galen, a Greek physician from the 2nd century AD, were considered almost infallible. His theories, while advanced for his time, went largely unchallenged for centuries. The medieval period also saw a significant divide between theoretical and practical medicine. University-trained physicians, who were often clergy, focused on theory and diagnosis but considered hands-on treatment beneath them. This left much of the actual medical care to barber surgeons, who performed procedures ranging from tooth extraction to amputations, and to midwives, who handled childbirth and women's health issues. It's important to remember that access to medical care varied greatly depending on one's social status. The wealthy could afford the services of university-trained physicians, while the poor often relied on folk remedies or the charity of monastic hospitals. Speaking of hospitals, these institutions began to emerge in greater numbers during the Middle Ages. However, they were quite different from modern hospitals. Often run by religious orders, they focused more on providing basic care and spiritual comfort than on curing diseases. The Crusades, while primarily religious and political in nature, also had an impact on medieval medicine. Exposure to Islamic medical knowledge, which had preserved and built upon classical learning, helped to reintroduce some lost knowledge to European medicine. However, the Crusades also had negative impacts on public health. The movement of large armies and pilgrims facilitated the spread of diseases, most notably contributing to the devastating outbreaks of plague in the 14th century. The Black Death, which ravaged Europe from 1347 to 1351, exposed the limitations of medieval medicine in dramatic fashion. Physicians were largely powerless against the disease, leading to a crisis of confidence in traditional medical authorities. This crisis, combined with other factors like the growth of cities and trade, would eventually contribute to the changes that ushered in the Renaissance and the beginnings of modern medicine. As we move forward in our exploration of medieval medicine, it's crucial to keep this historical context in mind. The practices we'll discuss, while often shocking by modern standards, were products of their time, shaped by limited knowledge, religious beliefs, and the social structures of the medieval world. In the following segments, we'll delve into specific aspects of medieval medical practice, examining the theories, treatments, and practitioners that defined healthcare in this fascinating and often misunderstood period of history. As we delve deeper into the murky waters of medieval medicine, we encounter one of its most enduring and influential concepts, the theory of the four humors. This ancient belief system, which persisted well into the Renaissance period, formed the cornerstone of medical understanding and treatment for centuries. The four humors theory originated in ancient Greece, with roots tracing back to the works of Apothecaries and later refined by Galen. It proposed that the human body was filled with four basic substances, called humors, which were thought to be in delicate balance when a person was healthy. These four humors were black bile, yellow bile, phlegm, and blood. Each humor was associated with a particular element, season, and set of qualities. Let's break them down one by one. First, we have black bile associated with the element of earth, the season of autumn, and the qualities of cold and dry. Black bile was thought to be produced by the spleen and was linked to a melancholic temperament. People with an excess of black bile were believed to be prone to depression, pessimism, and introversion. Next, we have yellow bile associated with the element of fire, the season of summer, and the qualities of hot and dry. The liver was thought to produce yellow bile, and an excess was linked to a choleric temperament. Those with too much yellow bile were believed to be quick-tempered, ambitious, and easily angered. The third humor, phlegm, was associated with the element of water, the season of winter, and the qualities of cold and wet. Phlegm was thought to originate in the brain and lungs, and an excess was linked to a phlegmatic temperament. People with too much phlegm were believed to be calm, unemotional, and slow to action. Finally, we have blood associated with the element of air, the season of spring, and the qualities of hot and wet. The heart was thought to produce blood, and an excess was linked to a sanguine temperament. Those with an abundance of blood were believed to be optimistic, cheerful, and sociable. Medieval physicians believed that these four humors needed to be in perfect balance for a person to maintain good health. Any imbalance or excess of one humor over the others was thought to cause illness. This concept of balance and imbalance formed the basis for most medical diagnoses and treatments during the medieval period. For example, if a patient presented with symptoms that the physician associated with an excess of black bile, such as lethargy or melancholy, the treatment would focus on reducing that humor. This might involve dietary changes, herbal remedies, or more invasive procedures like bloodletting or purging. The four humors theory also extended beyond just physical health. It was believed to influence a person's personality, emotions, and even their destiny. This led to the development of complex systems of correspondences between the humors and various aspects of life, including astrology, alchemy, and even politics. One particularly interesting aspect of the four humors theory was its influence on medieval cuisine. Foods were classified according to their supposed humoral properties, and diets were often prescribed as a form of medical treatment. For instance, a person thought to have an excess of phlegm might be advised to eat hot and dry foods to counteract the cold and wet nature of phlegm. The theory also had a significant impact on the practice of bloodletting, one of the most common medical procedures in medieval times. Physicians would often consult complex charts and almanacs to determine the best time and location on the body to perform bloodletting, based on the patient's symptoms and the perceived state of their humors. It's important to note that while the four humors theory may seem primitive or even absurd to us today, it was considered cutting-edge medical science for its time. The theory provided a systematic framework for understanding health and disease, which was a significant advancement over earlier, more mystical approaches to medicine. Moreover, the emphasis on balance and the interconnectedness of different aspects of health was not entirely misguided. Modern medicine recognizes the importance of homeostasis, the body's ability to maintain internal balance, and the complex interactions between different bodily systems. The four humors theory also laid the groundwork for the concept of individual differences in health and personality. While we no longer believe in the specific humors described by medieval physicians, the idea that people can have different predispositions to certain health conditions or personality traits is still relevant in modern medicine and psychology. However, the rigid adherence to this theory also had significant drawbacks. It often led to treatments that were ineffective at best and harmful at worst. For example, the practice of bloodletting, while sometimes beneficial in specific conditions, was often overused and could weaken patients who were already ill. The theory also limited the advancement of medical knowledge in some ways. Because it provided an all-encompassing explanation for health and disease, it discouraged the exploration of alternative theories or the systematic study of anatomy and physiology. Despite these limitations, the four humors theory persisted for centuries, shaping medical practice throughout the medieval period and well into the Renaissance. It wasn't until the scientific revolution of the 17th and 18th centuries that this ancient theory began to be seriously challenged and eventually replaced by more empirical approaches to medicine. As we reflect on the four humors theory, it serves as a fascinating example of how medical understanding evolves over time. It reminds us that what we consider to be scientific fact today may be viewed very differently by future generations. The history of the four humors theory encourages us to approach current medical knowledge with both respect for its foundations and a willingness to question and improve upon it. In our next segment, we'll explore some of the common treatments and practices that stem from the four humors theory, including the notorious practice of bloodletting. But for now, let this ancient medical philosophy seep into your thoughts as we transition to our next medieval medical mystery. As we delve deeper into the dark recesses of medieval medicine, we encounter a practice that was as widespread as it was misguided: bloodletting. This gruesome procedure was based on the ancient belief in the four humors, a concept that dominated medical thinking for centuries. The theory of the four humors proposed that the human body was filled with four basic substances: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. These humors were thought to be in delicate balance, and any imbalance could lead to illness. Bloodletting was seen as a way to restore this balance by quite literally draining the excess. Imagine, if you will, a dimly lit room in a medieval infirmary. A patient lies on a crude wooden bed, pale and sweating from fever. The physician, dressed in dark robes, approaches with a determined look in his eyes and a sharp blade in his hand. The most common method of bloodletting involved using a lancet, a sharp, pointed blade. The physician would make a small incision in a vein, often in the arm or leg, and allow the blood to flow into a bowl. The amount of blood removed could vary greatly, from a few ounces to several pints. But the lancet wasn't the only tool in the bloodletter's arsenal. Another popular device was the fleam, a spring-loaded blade that could make quick, precise cuts. For those who preferred a less invasive approach, there were leeches. These slimy creatures were applied to the skin, where they would latch on and suck blood until they were full. Bloodletting was prescribed for an astonishing array of ailments. Fevers, headaches, melancholy, and even indigestion were all thought to benefit from a good bleeding. The practice was so common that it became a routine preventative measure, with many people undergoing regular bloodletting to maintain their health. One of the most famous proponents of bloodletting was Galen, a Greek physician whose theories dominated Western medicine for over 1,000 years. Galen believed that blood was produced continuously by the liver and needed to be periodically drained to prevent it from stagnating and causing disease. This belief led to some truly extreme practices. In some cases, patients would be bled multiple times a day or have so much blood removed that they fainted. The wealthy and powerful were particularly susceptible to overzealous bloodletting, as they could afford the most frequent treatments. Consider the fate of King Charles II of England. When he suffered a seizure in 1685, his physicians subjected him to multiple bloodlettings, as well as blistering, purging, and the application of toxic metals. Unsurprisingly, the king did not survive this onslaught of treatments. But it wasn't just the elite who suffered from excessive bloodletting. The practice was so ingrained in medieval society that it became a part of everyday life. Barber surgeons, who combined the trades of haircutting and minor surgery, often performed bloodletting as a routine service. These barber surgeons would display a red and white striped pole outside their shops, a symbol that has persisted to this day. The red stripe represented blood, while the white represented the bandages used to staunch the flow after the procedure. The timing of bloodletting was considered crucial. Physicians consulted complex astrological charts to determine the best days and times for the procedure. They believed that the position of the stars and planets could influence the flow of blood in the body. Imagine the scene: a worried mother brings her feverish child to the local barber surgeon. The practitioner consults his charts, nods gravely, and pronounces that the stars are aligned for bloodletting. The child is laid on a bench, and the barber surgeon prepares his tools. As the blade pierces the skin, the child cries out in pain and fear. The mother looks on, torn between concern for her child's suffering and faith in the wisdom of the medical authorities. The blood flows into a waiting bowl, and with it, supposedly, the illness that plagues the young patient. But bloodletting wasn't just used for physical ailments. It was also employed to treat mental and emotional disorders. Melancholy, what we might now recognize as depression, was thought to be caused by an excess of black bile. The solution, you guessed it, more bloodletting. This practice led to tragic consequences for many individuals suffering from mental illness. Instead of receiving the care and support they needed, they were subjected to repeated bleedings that left them weak and anemic, often exacerbating their condition. The tools used for bloodletting evolved over time. In addition to lancets, fleams, and leeches, physicians also employed scarificators. These were spring-loaded devices containing multiple blades that could make several incisions at once, allowing for a quicker and more uniform bloodletting process. Another popular method was cupping. This involved placing heated glass cups on the skin, creating a vacuum that drew blood to the surface. The skin would then be cut, and the cups reapplied to draw out the blood. This method was thought to be particularly effective for drawing out bad humors from specific parts of the body. The practice of bloodletting was not without its critics, even in medieval times. Some physicians argued that it weakened patients and could lead to death if taken to extremes. However, these voices were often drowned out by the weight of tradition and the authority of ancient medical texts. It wasn't until the 19th century that bloodletting began to fall out of favor. As medical knowledge advanced and the germ theory of disease gained acceptance, the practice was gradually abandoned. However, it left a lasting mark on medical history and continues to fascinate and horrify us to this day. As we reflect on the practice of bloodletting, it's easy to shake our heads in disbelief. How could intelligent people believe in such a harmful practice? But it's important to remember that these physicians were working with the best knowledge available to them at the time. They truly believed they were helping their patients. This serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of scientific progress and the dangers of clinging too tightly to outdated beliefs. Who knows what current medical practices future generations will look back on with similar bewilderment. As we close this chapter on bloodletting, let the steady drip of the physician's bowl lull you deeper into relaxation. Feel the tension drain from your body, much like the blood from a medieval patient, but with far more pleasant results. Allow yourself to sink further into comfort as we prepare to explore the next dark corner of medieval medicine. As we delve deeper into the annals of medieval medicine, we encounter a practice that might make your skin crawl and your head ache just thinking about it. Trepanation, the act of drilling holes into the human skull, was surprisingly common in medieval times. This procedure, as gruesome as it sounds, was believed to cure a variety of ailments and was performed with alarming frequency. Imagine, if you will, a dimly lit room in a medieval infirmary. The air is thick with the scent of herbs and the unmistakable metallic tang of blood. A patient lies on a crude wooden table, their head secured in place. The surgeon, if we can call them that, approaches with a set of primitive tools that would make a modern doctor recoil in horror. The most common tool for trepanation was the trepan, a circular saw with a center pin that allowed it to bore into the skull. Picture a hand-cranked drill, but instead of making holes in wood, it's cutting through bone. The surgeon would carefully position the trepan on the patient's head, often choosing a spot based on the symptoms the patient was experiencing. With a steady hand and a strong stomach, the surgeon would begin to turn the trepan, slowly cutting through the outer layer of the skull. The sound of metal grinding against bone would fill the room, punctuated by the occasional gasp or moan from the patient. Yes, you heard that right, patients were often conscious during this procedure, with only rudimentary forms of anesthesia available, if any at all. As the trepan cut deeper, the surgeon would need to be incredibly careful not to damage the delicate membrane protecting the brain. One slip, one moment of inattention, and the patient could suffer permanent brain damage or death. It's a testament to the skill of some medieval surgeons that this procedure was sometimes successful, though the mortality rate was undoubtedly high. But why, you might ask, would anyone willingly undergo such a risky and painful procedure? The reasons were as varied as they were misguided by modern standards. Trepanation was believed to cure epilepsy, migraines, and mental disorders. Some thought it could release evil spirits trapped within the skull, while others believed it could relieve pressure on the brain. One common reason for trepanation was to treat head injuries. In an age of frequent warfare and limited protective gear, skull fractures were not uncommon. Medieval surgeons would use trepanation to remove bone fragments, drain blood, or relieve pressure caused by swelling. In these cases, the procedure might actually have been beneficial, albeit extremely risky. Interestingly, evidence of trepanation has been found in skulls dating back to prehistoric times, suggesting that this practice has been around for thousands of years. Some skulls show signs of healing, indicating that the patient survived the procedure and lived for some time afterwards. It's a chilling reminder of the resilience of the human body and the lengths people have gone to in search of medical treatment. The tools used for trepanation evolved over time, but they remain terrifyingly simple by modern standards. In addition to the trepan, surgeons might use a tool called an elevatorium to lift the circular piece of bone they had cut. Imagine a small metal lever, not unlike a miniature crowbar, being used to pry open your skull. The thought alone is enough to make one's head spin. Another tool in the medieval skull surgeon's arsenal was the raspatory, a scraping tool used to smooth the edges of the hole created by the trepan. This was important to prevent damage to the brain and to promote healing. However, the idea of someone scraping away at the inside of your skull is hardly comforting. The aftermath of trepanation was often as gruesome as the procedure itself. Infection was a constant threat, as the concept of sterile surgical conditions was centuries away from being narrator. For those lucky enough to survive both the procedure and the risk of infection, the recovery process was long and arduous. The hole in the skull would eventually heal over with new bone growth, but this could take months or even years. During this time, the patient would be at risk of further injury to the exposed area of the brain. Despite its dangers, trepanation continued to be practiced well into the Renaissance period. It wasn't until the advent of modern medical techniques and a better understanding of brain anatomy that the practice began to fall out of favor. However, it's worth noting that modified forms of trepanation are still used in modern neurosurgery, albeit with much more precision and under far safer conditions. One particularly unsettling aspect of medieval trepanation was the belief that the procedure could be used to treat mental illness. Patients suffering from conditions we now recognize as depression, schizophrenia, or bipolar disorder might find themselves subjected to this dangerous surgery. The rationale was that by creating an opening in the skull, the bad humors or evil spirits causing the mental disturbance could be released. Imagine the terror of a person already struggling with their mental health being told that the cure involved drilling a hole in their head. It's a stark reminder of how far our understanding of mental health has come, and how much suffering was endured by those with mental illness in the past. The practice of trepanation wasn't limited to Europe. Evidence of the procedure has been found in cultures around the world, from ancient Peru to medieval Islamic societies. In some cases, it was performed as a religious or spiritual ritual rather than a medical procedure. The idea that opening the skull could allow for spiritual enlightenment or the expulsion of demons was surprisingly widespread. As we reflect on the practice of trepanation in skull surgery in medieval times, it's easy to feel a sense of horror and disbelief. How could our ancestors have thought this was a good idea? But it's important to remember that they were working with the best knowledge they had at the time, limited though it was. Their desire to heal and help others was no less genuine than that of modern doctors, even if their methods seem barbaric to us now. In the grand scheme of medical history, trepanation serves as a powerful reminder of how far we've come. From crude holes drilled in skulls to precise, computer-guided neurosurgery, the evolution of medical science is truly remarkable. Yet, it also humbles us to think about what future generations might consider barbaric in our current medical practices. As we close this chapter on trepanation and skull surgery, let the gentle tapping of raindrops on your window replace the imagined sound of the trepan on bone. Allow the soft whisper of your breath to wash away the lingering unease of medieval operating rooms. Rest easy knowing that should you ever need brain surgery, it will be performed with tools far more sophisticated than a hand-cranked drill and a miniature crowbar. As we delve deeper into the world of medieval medicine, we encounter a realm where nature's bounty was both a source of hope and, at times, misguided peril. The medieval apothecary, a predecessor to our modern pharmacist, played a crucial role in the healthcare system of the time. Apothecaries were the keepers of herbal lore, mixing potions and remedies from a vast array of plants, minerals, and sometimes more exotic ingredients. Their shops were filled with jars, vials, and bundles of dried herbs, each promising relief from various ailments. One of the most common remedies in the medieval apothecary's arsenal is the use of herbs. Herbs were believed to have powerful healing properties, and their use was deeply rooted in ancient traditions and folklore. Let's explore some of the most popular herbal remedies of the time. Chamomile, a flower still used today for its calming properties, was a staple in medieval medicine. It was used to treat everything from digestive issues to anxiety and insomnia. The gentle flower was often brewed into a tea or used in poultices for external application. Another widely used herb was sage, which was believed to have almost miraculous properties. The Latin name for sage, salvia, comes from the word to heal. Medieval healers used sage to treat fevers, memory loss, and even epilepsy. It was also thought to ward off evil spirits and was often hung in doorways for protection. Garlic, known for its pungent aroma, was revered for its medicinal properties. It was used to treat respiratory ailments, digestive issues, and was even believed to ward off the plague. Garlic cloves were often worn around the neck as a protective amulet. Lavender, with its soothing scent, was used to treat headaches, insomnia, and anxiety. It was also believed to have antiseptic properties and was used in the treatment of wounds and burns. The fragrant herb was often stuffed into pillows to promote restful sleep. One particularly interesting herb in the medieval pharmacopoeia was mandrake. This plant, with its human-like root, was surrounded by superstition and folklore. It was believed to have powerful magical properties and was used as a sedative and painkiller. However, the process of harvesting mandrake was fraught with danger, as it was thought that the plant would emit a deadly scream when pulled from the ground. While many of these herbal remedies had genuine medicinal properties, the lack of scientific understanding often led to misuse or overuse. For instance, St. John's wort, which is still used today for mild depression, was believed to cure melancholy in medieval times. However, its interactions with other herbs or substances were not well understood, potentially leading to harmful effects. The medieval apothecary's shop was a fascinating place, filled with an array of exotic and sometimes dangerous substances. In addition to herbs, apothecaries would stock minerals, animal products, and even precious stones, all believed to have healing properties. One such mineral was sulfur, known for its distinctive smell. It was used to treat skin conditions and was believed to purify the blood. However, its toxic nature when ingested or inhaled in large quantities was not fully appreciated at the time. Another common item in the apothecary's inventory was theriac, a complex mixture containing dozens of ingredients, including opium and sometimes even viper flesh. This cure-all was believed to be an antidote to all poisons and was used to treat a wide range of ailments. The preparation of theriac was a lengthy and elaborate process, often taking months to complete. Precious stones also played a role in medieval medicine. For example, sapphires were ground into a powder and used to treat eye ailments, while emeralds were thought to cure dysentery and stop bleeding. These treatments, while ineffective, highlight the blend of superstition and medicine that characterized the era. The medieval apothecary also dealt in more mundane, yet essential items. Honey, for instance, was widely used for its antibacterial properties in wound dressing. This use of honey has actually been validated by modern science, showcasing that not all medieval remedies were without merit. However, it's important to note that the practice of apothecary was not standardized or regulated in medieval times. This led to significant variations in the quality and efficacy of remedies. Some apothecaries were skilled herbalists with a deep understanding of plant properties, while others were little more than charlatans selling ineffective or even harmful concoctions. The lack of regulation also meant that there was no standardization in the preparation of medicines. Different apothecaries might create vastly different remedies for the same ailment based on their personal knowledge, available ingredients, or even local traditions. Moreover, the concept of dosage was not this was particularly dangerous with herbs that had potent active ingredients or toxic properties when used in large quantities. Despite these challenges, medieval apothecaries played a crucial role in healthcare. They were often the first point of contact for people seeking relief from various ailments. In many cases, their herbal remedies provided comfort, even if they didn't always cure the underlying condition. As we reflect on the practices of medieval apothecaries, it's easy to dismiss much of their work as mere superstition. However, it's important to remember that many of our modern medicines have roots in these ancient practices. The study of herbal remedies continues to this day, with researchers exploring the potential of plants for new drug discoveries. In conclusion, the world of herbal remedies and apothecaries in medieval times was a complex blend of genuine medicinal knowledge, folklore, and sometimes dangerous misconceptions. While we may look back on some of these practices with amusement or horror, they represent an important chapter in the evolution of medical science. The medieval apothecary, with all its flaws and occasional successes, laid the groundwork for the systematic study of pharmacology that would emerge in later centuries. As we delve deeper into the medical practices of medieval times, we encounter a realm where faith and healing were inextricably intertwined. The church played a pivotal role in healthcare, often blurring the lines between spiritual and physical remedies. In many cases, prayer was considered the first line of defense against illness. The devout believed that sickness was a manifestation of sin or a test from God. This perspective led to some rather interesting medical approaches that might seem peculiar to our modern sensibilities. One common practice was the use of holy relics for healing. These objects, believed to have belonged to or been touched by saints, were thought to possess miraculous curative powers. Pilgrims would travel great distances to visit shrines housing these relics, hoping for a chance at divine intervention. Imagine, if you will, a dimly lit cathedral. Incense wafts through the air as a line of ailing individuals shuffles forward. At the front, an ornate reliquary containing a fragment of bone or scrap of cloth. The faithful would touch or kiss these relics, praying fervently for healing. Some of the most sought-after relics included the alleged milk teeth of Jesus, splinters from the true cross, and even vials said to contain the breath of Christ. The more outlandish the relic, the more potent its perceived healing power. But it wasn't just relics that were believed to have curative properties. Holy water, blessed by priests, was another popular remedy. It was used for everything from treating minor ailments to warding off serious diseases. Some people would drink it, while others would bathe in it or use it to wash their wounds. The concept of miraculous springs and wells also gained traction during this period. These natural water sources were often associated with saints or religious apparitions. Lourdes in France, which remains a popular pilgrimage site to this day, is a prime example of this phenomenon. Pilgrims would flock to these holy sites, hoping to cure their ailments by drinking or bathing in the waters. The journey itself was often seen as part of the healing process, a test of faith and endurance that could purify the soul and, by extension, the body. Another intriguing aspect of religious healing was the use of prayer as a form of medicine. Monasteries often doubled as hospitals, with monks serving as both spiritual guides and healthcare providers. These religious orders developed elaborate prayer rituals specifically designed for healing. One such practice was the recitation of healing psalms. Certain passages from the Bible were believed to have particular efficacy against specific ailments. For instance, Psalm 91 was often invoked for protection against the plague, while Psalm 6 was thought to be effective against fevers. The power of prayer wasn't limited to verbal recitation. Visual representations of saints and biblical scenes were also believed to have healing properties. Illuminated manuscripts featuring images of Christ or various saints were sometimes placed on the bodies of the sick, in the hope that the mere proximity to these holy depictions would drive out illness. In some cases, the lines between religious healing and what we might consider more conventional medicine were quite blurred. Many herbs and plants used in medieval medicine had religious significance. For example, the herb vervain was associated with the Virgin Mary and was believed to have both medicinal and spiritual properties. The role of saints in medieval healing cannot be overstated. Many saints were associated with specific ailments or parts of the body. Saint Apollonia, for instance, was invoked for toothaches, while Saint Blaise was called upon for throat ailments. People would pray to these patron saints, often accompanied by specific rituals or offerings. One particularly interesting practice was the use of measure charms. This involved measuring the afflicted part of the body with a string or ribbon, which would then be tied around a statue of the appropriate saint. It was believed that as the string wore away, so too would the illness. The church also played a role in what we might consider preventative medicine. Fasting and dietary restrictions were not just religious observances, but were also thought to have health benefits. The idea of purifying the body through abstinence was deeply ingrained in medieval medical thought. However, it's important to note that not all religious healing practices were benign. The belief in demonic possession as a cause of illness led to some rather disturbing treatments. Exorcisms, while primarily spiritual in nature, could involve physical components that we would now consider abusive or harmful. Despite the prevalence of faith-based healing, it's worth mentioning that not everyone in medieval society relied solely on religious remedies. There was often a complex interplay between spiritual and secular medical practices. Many people would seek both religious and non-religious treatments, hedging their bets, so to speak. As we near the end of this segment, let's reflect on the profound impact that religious beliefs had on medieval medicine. While many of these practices may seem superstitious or even harmful from our modern perspective, they provided comfort and hope to countless individuals in a time when scientific understanding of disease was limited. The legacy of religious healing in medieval times continues to influence some aspects of modern healthcare. The power of belief, the importance of holistic care, and the recognition of the mind-body connection are all concepts that have roots in these ancient practices. As we drift off to sleep, perhaps we can appreciate the complex tapestry of human belief and the enduring quest for healing that has shaped our medical practices throughout history. In our next segment, we'll explore the role of herbs and natural remedies in medieval medicine, another fascinating aspect of this era's approach to health and healing. As we delve deeper into the medical practices of medieval times, we cannot overlook the role of hospitals. These institutions, while far from the sterile, well-equipped facilities we know today, played a crucial part in medieval healthcare. The concept of hospitals in medieval Europe evolved from the Roman valetudinaria, which were infirmaries for soldiers and slaves. As Christianity spread across the continent, the idea of caring for the sick as a form of charity took hold, leading to the establishment of more civilian hospitals. Many of these early medieval hospitals were founded and run by monastic orders. The rule of Saint Benedict, written in the 6th century, explicitly stated that the care of the sick should be placed above all other duties. This led to the creation of infirmaries within monasteries, which eventually expanded to serve the general public. One of the most famous examples of these monastic hospitals was the Hôtel Dieu in Paris, founded in 651 CE. It was staffed by Augustinian nuns and became a model for many other hospitals across Europe. The Hôtel Dieu provided care not just for the sick, but also for the poor, orphans, and pilgrims. However, the conditions in these hospitals were far from ideal. Overcrowding was a common issue, with patients often sharing beds. In some cases, 2 or even 3 patients would be crammed into a single bed, regardless of their ailments. This practice, while born out of necessity and charitable intent, unfortunately, contributed to the spread of infections. The layout of medieval hospitals was also quite different from what we're accustomed to today. Many were built in a cruciform shape with a chapel at the center. This design allowed bedridden patients to observe religious services from their beds, as spiritual care was considered just as important as physical treatment. Ventilation in these hospitals was poor and sanitation was rudimentary at best. Windows were often small and few in number, leading to stuffy, malodorous conditions. The concept of germs and infection was unknown, so there was little effort made to maintain a sterile environment. The staff of these hospitals consisted primarily of monks, nuns, and lay brothers and sisters. While they were dedicated to their work, their medical knowledge was limited. Most of their care focused on providing comfort, food, and spiritual guidance rather than active medical treatment. The daily routine in a medieval hospital revolved around prayer and basic care. Patients would be woken at dawn for morning prayers, followed by a simple breakfast. Throughout the day, they would receive visits from the hospital staff, who would change bandages, administer herbal remedies, and provide meals. One of the most common treatments in these hospitals was bloodletting. This practice, based on the theory of the 4 humors, was believed to restore balance to the body. Patients would have their blood drawn using leeches or by making small incisions in the skin. While we now know this practice was often harmful, it remained a staple of medieval medicine for centuries. Diet played a significant role in medieval hospital care. The food served was based on the principles of humoral theory, with different foods prescribed for different ailments. For example, patients with fever might be given cool, moist foods like cucumbers or melons, while those with cold illnesses might receive warm, dry foods like roasted meats. Herbal remedies were also widely used in these hospitals. Herbs like chamomile for calming, garlic for infections, and willow bark, precursor to aspirin, for pain relief were commonly administered. While some of these remedies had genuine medicinal properties, others were based more on folklore than scientific understanding. Surgery, when performed in medieval hospitals, was a risky affair. Without anesthesia or a proper understanding of anatomy, procedures were often painful and dangerous. Surgeons, who were considered separate from physicians and often of lower status, would perform amputations, remove bladder stones, and attempt to treat wounds and fractures. The instruments used in these surgeries were crude by modern standards. Saws, knives, and forceps were common tools, often not properly cleaned between procedures. This lack of sterilization, combined with the absence of antiseptics, led to high rates of post-operative infection. Despite these challenges, medieval hospitals did provide some benefits. They offered shelter and basic care to those who might otherwise have had none. For many of the poor and destitute, these institutions were their only option for receiving any form of medical attention. As the medieval period progressed, some advancements were made in hospital care. The school of Salerno in Italy, founded in the 9th century, began to introduce more systematic medical education. This led to a gradual improvement in the quality of care provided in some hospitals. By the late medieval period, some cities began to establish civic hospitals, run by local governments rather than religious orders. These institutions often had more resources and could provide better care. The Santa Maria Nuova in Florence, founded in 1288, was one such hospital that became renowned for its quality of care. However, it's important to note that these improvements were not universal. Many hospitals, particularly in smaller towns and rural areas, continued to operate under primitive conditions well into the Renaissance period. The Black Death, which ravaged Europe in the 14th century, had a significant impact on medieval hospitals. Many of these institutions were overwhelmed by the sheer number of patients, and many of the caregivers themselves fell victim to the plague. This crisis highlighted the limitations of medieval medical knowledge and practices. In the wake of the Black Death, some changes began to occur in hospital administration. There was a greater emphasis on hygiene, although still limited by the medical understanding of the time. Some hospitals began to isolate patients with certain symptoms, an early form of quarantine. As we near the end of our exploration of medieval hospitals, it's worth reflecting on the complex legacy they left behind. While they were far from the advanced medical centers we know today, they represented an important step in the development of organized healthcare. These institutions, born out of religious charity and civic duty, laid the groundwork for the modern hospital system. They established the principle that society has a responsibility to care for its sick and vulnerable members, a concept that remains central to healthcare ethics today. So as you drift off to sleep, imagine the flickering candlelight in a medieval hospital ward, the soft murmur of prayers, and the dedication of those early caregivers. While we may shudder at some of their practices, we can appreciate the compassion that drove them to care for the sick and suffering in those challenging times. As the Black Death swept across Europe in the 14th century, medieval physicians found themselves woefully unprepared to combat this devastating plague. Their understanding of disease was limited, and their treatments often did more harm than good. Let's explore some of the terrifying and misguided plague treatments that were common during this dark period of medical history. One of the most popular theories about the cause of the plague was that it was spread by bad air, or miasma. This led to some rather peculiar preventative measures. Plague doctors, with their iconic beaked masks, would stuff the beaks with aromatic herbs and straw, believing this would purify the air they breathed. These plague doctor outfits were a sight to behold. They wore long leather coats, boots, gloves, and a wide-brimmed hat, all of which were thought to protect them from the disease. The outfit was completed by a cane, which they used to examine patients from a distance, and sometimes to beat away people who got too close. But what about the actual treatments for those unfortunate souls who contracted the plague? One common approach was bloodletting, a practice based on the ancient theory of the four humors. Physicians believed that by draining blood from the patient, they could restore balance to the body and cure the disease. This was often done using leeches, which were applied to the skin to suck out the bad blood. In some cases, barber surgeons would make incisions in the patient's veins to drain larger quantities of blood. As you might imagine, this practice often left patients weaker and more susceptible to infection, rather than curing them. Another popular treatment was the use of herbal remedies. While some of these might have had mild beneficial effects, others were downright dangerous. For example, people would consume mixtures containing arsenic and mercury, believing these toxic substances would drive out the plague. One particularly gruesome treatment involved creating buboes, which were swollen, pus-filled lymph nodes characteristic of the plague. Physicians would lance these buboes and apply a mixture of tree resin, flower roots, and pig fat to draw out the poisonous fluid. This painful procedure rarely helped and often led to further infection. Some doctors recommended a diet of onions, garlic, and herbs, thinking these strong-smelling foods would ward off the disease. While this might have had some mild antimicrobial effects, it was far from a cure. Others advised patients to consume a spoonful of crushed emeralds, believing the precious stone had healing properties. Needless to say, this expensive treatment did little to help the afflicted. In some cases, live animals were used in treatments. A common practice was to cut a pigeon in half and strap the still warm body to the patient's feet. This was thought to draw out the poison from the body. Similarly, some physicians would advise placing a live chicken's bottom against a bubo, believing the bird would absorb the disease. Religious and superstitious practices also played a significant role in plague treatments. Many people believed the plague was a punishment from God, leading to extreme acts of penance. Flagellants would travel from town to town, whipping themselves bloody in public displays of repentance, hoping to appease divine wrath and end the plague. Some communities turned to saint worship for protection. Saint Sebastian, who was said to have survived being shot full of arrows, became associated with the plague due to the similarity between arrows and the divine punishment of disease. People would pray to him and create elaborate artworks depicting his martyrdom, hoping for his intercession. Another saint invoked during plague times was Saint Roch, who was said to have miraculously recovered from the plague himself. Pilgrims would travel to sites associated with these saints, often carrying plague with them and inadvertently spreading the disease further. In some cases, people resorted to wearing amulets or charms for protection. These might include herbs sewn into pouches, stones with supposed magical properties, or even dead toads worn around the neck. While these remedies did nothing to prevent or cure the plague, they provided a sense of comfort and control in a time of great uncertainty. As the plague continued to ravage populations, some physicians began to recognize the importance of quarantine. Cities would isolate infected individuals and their families, sometimes boarding up entire houses with the occupants still inside. While cruel, this practice did help to slow the spread of the disease in some areas. In Venice, authorities established the first quarantine station on an island near the city. Ships arriving from plague-infected areas were required to anchor there for 40 days before being allowed to dock in Venice. This practice gave us the word quarantine, derived from the Italian 40 giorni, meaning 40 days. Despite these efforts, the plague continued to resurface periodically throughout the medieval period and beyond. It wasn't until the development of modern germ theory and antibiotics in the 19th and 20th centuries that effective treatments for the plague were finally discovered. As we reflect on these terrifying medieval plague treatments, we can appreciate how far medical science has come. The misguided and often harmful practices of the past serve as a reminder of the importance of scientific understanding and evidence-based medicine in our modern world. As we delve deeper into the medical practices of medieval times, we come to a topic that was both commonplace and fraught with danger: childbirth. The process of bringing new life into the world was a perilous journey for both mother and child, often shrouded in superstition and limited by the medical knowledge of the time. In medieval Europe, childbirth was primarily the domain of midwives. These women, often experienced mothers themselves, played a crucial role in assisting with deliveries and providing care for expectant mothers. However, their methods and practices were far from what we would consider safe or effective today. Midwives relied heavily on herbal remedies and folk traditions passed down through generations. Some of these practices had merit, while others were based on superstition or misunderstandings about the human body. For instance, it was common for midwives to use herbs like ergot to induce labor or ease pain. While ergot does have some medicinal properties, it can also be dangerous if used improperly, potentially causing severe complications for both mother and child. The birthing process itself was often conducted in the home, with the mother surrounded by female relatives and neighbors. Men, including physicians, were generally excluded from the birthing chamber, as it was considered improper for them to be present. This meant that if complications arose, there was often a delay in seeking more advanced medical assistance, which could prove fatal. One of the most dangerous aspects of medieval childbirth was the lack of understanding about hygiene and infection. Midwives and attendants rarely washed their hands or sterilized their tools, unknowingly introducing harmful bacteria into the birthing process. This led to high rates of puerperal fever, a severe infection that could quickly turn fatal for new mothers. The position in which women gave birth also differed from modern practices. Many women delivered their babies while sitting on a birthing stool or chair, which was believed to use gravity to assist in the process. While this position does have some benefits, it also increased the risk of tearing and made it more difficult for midwives to assist if complications arose. In cases of difficult births, medieval midwives had limited options. They might attempt to manually reposition the baby, a dangerous procedure that could lead to injury or death for both mother and child. In extreme cases, they might resort to using hooks or other crude instruments to extract the baby, often with devastating results. The concept of cesarean sections did exist in medieval times, but it was considered an absolute last resort and was almost always fatal for the mother. The procedure was typically only performed when the mother had already died or was near death, in an attempt to save the child's soul through baptism before it, too, perished. Superstitions and religious beliefs also played a significant role in medieval childbirth practices. Many believed that the pain of childbirth was a divine punishment for Eve's original sin, and thus, attempts to alleviate this pain were sometimes viewed as going against God's will. This mindset often led to women enduring unnecessary suffering during labor and delivery. Amulets and charms were commonly used to protect both mother and child during pregnancy and birth. These might include religious relics, certain gemstones, or herbs believed to have protective properties. While these items provided psychological comfort, they did little to address the very real medical risks involved in childbirth. The high mortality rates associated with childbirth in medieval times were staggering by modern standards. It's estimated that up to 20% of women died during or shortly after childbirth, with even higher rates among the nobility due to factors like inbreeding and early marriages. Infant mortality was also extremely high, with many children not surviving their first year of life. Despite these grim statistics, there were some midwives who developed impressive skills and knowledge through experience. They learned to recognize certain complications and developed techniques to address them. For instance, some midwives became adept at turning breech bobbies or managing postpartum hemorrhage using herbal remedies and manual techniques. However, the lack of formal medical training and the limited understanding of anatomy and physiology meant that even the most skilled midwives were often working in the dark. The human reproductive system was poorly understood, and many beliefs about conception and fetal development were based on misconceptions that persisted for centuries. One particularly dangerous practice was the use of birth girdles, long strips of parchment or cloth inscribed with prayers and religious symbols. These were wrapped around the laboring woman's body in the belief that they would ease pain and ensure a safe delivery. While harmless in themselves, the reliance on such methods often delayed more practical interventions when complications arose. In the rare cases where male physicians were called to assist with difficult births, their interventions were often more harmful than helpful. Many doctors of the time still adhered to the ancient Greek theory of the wandering womb, believing that a woman's uterus could move around her body, causing various ailments. This led to treatments that were at best ineffective and at worst dangerous, such as applying strong-smelling substances to various parts of the body to lure the womb back into place. The aftermath of childbirth was another perilous time for medieval women. Postpartum care was limited, and many women died from infections or hemorrhage in the days following delivery. The concept of the lying-in period, where new mothers were confined to bed for several weeks after giving birth, was common. While this practice allowed for some rest and recovery, it also increased the risk of blood clots and other complications associated with prolonged immobility. As we reflect on the challenges faced by women during childbirth in medieval times, it's important to recognize the bravery and resilience of those who endured these ordeals. The progress we've made in maternal and infant health care over the centuries is truly remarkable, yet it's sobering to remember that in some parts of the world today, women still face similar risks and challenges during childbirth. The story of medieval childbirth and midwifery serves as a poignant reminder of how far medical science has come, and how much we owe to the generations of women and healthcare providers who have worked tirelessly to improve the safety and outcomes of this most fundamental human experience. As we delve deeper into the unsettling world of medieval medicine, let's turn our attention to a practice that still sends shivers down many spines today: dentistry. In the Middle Ages, dental care was far from the sterile, anestheticated procedures we know today. Instead, it was a realm of excruciating pain and questionable methods. Imagine, if you will, living in a time when toothaches were not just inconvenient, but potentially life-threatening. The concept of regular dental checkups was non-existent, and people only sought help when the pain became unbearable. When that moment arrived, they didn't visit a trained dentist because such a profession didn't exist. Instead, they turned to the local barber surgeon. Yes, you heard that correctly. The same person who cut your hair and trimmed your beard might also be responsible for extracting your aching tooth. These barber surgeons were often skilled with sharp implements, but their knowledge of dental anatomy and proper care was limited at best. The most common dental procedure in medieval times was tooth extraction. However, without proper anesthesia or sterilization, this process was nothing short of torturous. The barber surgeon would use a variety of crude tools to pry the offending tooth from the patient's jaw. These implements ranged from forceps and pliers to more specialized devices like the dental key, a terrifying instrument that looked like a cross between a corkscrew and a pair of pliers. To use the dental key, the barber surgeon would clamp the metal claw around the problematic tooth, then twist the handle to literally wrench the tooth from its socket. The process was excruciatingly painful and often resulted in broken teeth, damaged gums, and even fractured jaws. Patients would be held down by assistants or family members as they writhed in agony during the procedure. But extraction wasn't the only dental horror medieval people had to endure. For those suffering from toothaches but unwilling to undergo extraction, there were other, equally unpleasant options. One popular remedy involved cauterization, burning the gum around the affected tooth with a hot iron. The theory was that this would kill the nerve and stop the pain. In reality, it often led to severe infections and further complications. Another common treatment for toothaches was bloodletting. Following the misguided humoral theory of medicine, practitioners believed that drawing blood from the gums or nearby veins would help balance the body's humors and alleviate dental pain. This practice not only failed to address the root cause of the problem, but also weakened patients and left them vulnerable to infections. For those lucky enough to keep their teeth, dental hygiene was a constant battle. Toothbrushes, as we know them, didn't exist until the late 17th century. Instead, people in medieval times used twigs, often from aromatic trees like cinnamon or neem, frayed at one end to form a crude brush. These chew sticks were used to scrub teeth and massage gums, providing some level of cleaning, albeit far less effective than modern toothbrushes. Toothpaste, too, was a far cry from the minty fresh tubes we use today. Medieval people concocted their own dental cleaning mixtures using abrasive materials like crushed bones or eggshells, mixed with various herbs and spices. While these might have provided some cleaning action, they were often too abrasive and damaged tooth enamel over time. The lack of proper dental care led to widespread tooth decay and gum disease. By middle age, many people had lost a significant number of their teeth. This not only affected their ability to eat and speak, but also had serious social implications. A full set of teeth was considered a sign of youth and vitality, while missing teeth were associated with old age and poverty. To combat the aesthetic issues of missing teeth, some wealthy individuals turned to primitive forms of dentures. These early false teeth were often made from human teeth extracted from corpses or sold by the desperately poor. Other materials used included ivory, bone, or even wood. These dentures were uncomfortable, prone to decay, and did little to improve chewing ability. They were primarily for appearance, allowing the wealthy to maintain a semblance of a full smile. The poor state of dental health in medieval times had far-reaching consequences beyond mere discomfort. Infections that started in the mouth could spread to other parts of the body, sometimes with fatal results. A simple toothache could lead to a systemic infection, causing fever, swelling, and in severe cases, death. The connection between oral health and overall health was not well understood, leading to countless preventable deaths. One particularly gruesome aspect of medieval dentistry was the treatment of dental abscesses. When a tooth became severely infected, forming a painful pus-filled abscess, medieval practitioners would often attempt to drain it using hot irons or sharp implements. This procedure, performed without anesthesia or proper sanitation, was agonizing and frequently led to further complications. It's worth noting that not all dental practices in the Middle Ages were entirely misguided. Some practitioners recognized the importance of cleaning teeth and recommended rinsing the mouth with wine or vinegar to kill bacteria. Others advised against consuming too many sweets, showing an early understanding of the link between sugar and tooth decay. However, these nuggets of wisdom were often buried beneath a mountain of superstition and misinformation. Many people believed that toothaches were caused by tiny worms burrowing into the teeth, a belief that persisted well into the 18th century. This led to treatments aimed at smoking out these non-existent worms, often involving burning herbs and inhaling the smoke through a funnel. As we reflect on the state of medieval dentistry, it's clear that our ancestors endured tremendous suffering in their pursuit of dental health. The next time you sit in a modern dentist's chair, surrounded by advanced equipment and pain management techniques, take a moment to appreciate how far we've come. The horrors of medieval dental practices serve as a stark reminder of the progress we've made in medical science and the importance of continued research and development in healthcare. With that sobering thought, we'll take a brief pause in our exploration of medieval medicine. When we return, we'll delve into the equally fascinating and disturbing world of medieval surgical practices. Stay tuned if you dare. As we delve deeper into the unsettling world of medieval medicine, we cannot overlook the crude and often terrifying surgical instruments used during this era. These tools, far from the precision instruments we associate with modern surgery, were more akin to implements of torture than healing devices. Let's begin with one of the most common surgical tools, the cautery iron. This instrument was essentially a metal rod heated to searing temperatures, used to burn wounds closed and stop bleeding. While effective in stemming blood loss, the excruciating pain and risk of infection were significant drawbacks. Imagine being a patient in medieval times, lying on a wooden table, your wound exposed. The surgeon approaches, holding a glowing red iron rod. The sizzle of your flesh and the acrid smell of burning skin fill the air as the cautery iron makes contact. This was the reality of medieval surgical practice. Another frequently used tool was the trepan, a device used for drilling holes into the skull. This procedure, known as trepanation, was believed to cure various ailments, from headaches to mental disorders. The trepan resembled a corkscrew with a cylindrical blade, which the surgeon would manually rotate to bore through the patient's skull. Picture the scene: a person suffering from severe headaches is strapped down to prevent movement. The surgeon positions the trepan against their skull and begins to turn the handle. The grinding of metal against bone echoes through the room as the blade slowly penetrates the skull. It's a gruesome process that could last for hours, often performed without any form of anesthesia. Amputation was another common surgical procedure in medieval times, often necessary due to infections or injuries sustained in battle. The primary tool for this grisly task was the bone saw. Unlike modern surgical saws, these were often repurposed carpentry tools, large and unwieldy. The bone saw's teeth were coarse and uneven, making the process of cutting through bone a slow and agonizing ordeal. Patients would be held down by several strong assistants as the surgeon began to saw through the limb. The screams of the patient would mingle with the harsh scraping of the saw against bone, creating a horrifying cacophony. For more delicate procedures, surgeons employed a variety of knives and scalpels. However, these were far from the sterile, precisely crafted instruments we use today. Often, they were little more than sharpened pieces of metal, prone to causing additional trauma to the surrounding tissue during use. One particularly unsettling tool was the vaginal speculum, used for examining and treating issues in the birth canal. This device, resembling a pair of scissors with flattened blades, would be inserted and then cranked open to provide access. The discomfort and potential for injury were significant, especially given the lack of proper sterilization techniques. Bloodletting, a common practice believed to balance the body's humors, required its own set of tools. The most recognizable of these was the fleam, a small blade used to open veins. Surgeons would select a vein, often in the arm or neck, and make a quick incision with the fleam. The blood would then be collected in a bowl until the desired amount had been drained. For those squeamish about direct cutting, there was always the option of using leeches. These blood-sucking creatures were kept in jars and applied directly to the skin. The sight of dozens of leeches writhing on a patient's body, slowly swelling with blood, was enough to turn even the strongest stomachs. Dental procedures were particularly dreadful in medieval times. The main tool for tooth extraction was the dental key, so named because of its resemblance to a large key. This instrument would be clamped onto the problem tooth, and the surgeon would then rotate it, quite literally wrenching the tooth from the patient's jaw. The sound of splintering bone and tearing gum tissue would fill the air as the dental key did its work. It wasn't uncommon for pieces of the jaw to come away with the tooth, leaving the patient with a bloody, gaping wound that was highly susceptible to infection. For issues deeper within the body, surgeons turned to tools like the spatula mundana. This long, thin metal rod was used to probe wounds and internal cavities. Without any real understanding of internal anatomy, surgeons would blindly push this instrument into the body, causing untold damage in their quest to diagnose or treat ailments. Another tool that strikes fear into modern hearts is the tongue depressor. While today it's a harmless wooden stick, in medieval times it was a metal clamp designed to forcibly hold the tongue down during procedures. The risk of accidentally crushing or severing the tongue was ever present. For dealing with bladder stones, a painful and common condition in medieval times, surgeons used a horrifying device called the lipotome. This instrument, resembling a pair of metal tongs, would be inserted through the urethra to grasp and crush the stone. The excruciating pain and potential for severe internal damage made this procedure one of the most feared. In cases of difficult childbirth, medieval surgeons had a particularly gruesome tool at their disposal, the embryotomy hook. This sharp, curved instrument was used to dismember a fetus that couldn't be delivered normally in an attempt to save the mother's life. The psychological trauma for all involved in such a procedure is unimaginable. It's important to note that these tools were often used without any form of sterilization. The concept of germs and infection was unknown, so surgeons would move from patient to patient without cleaning their instruments. This practice led to rampant infections and contributed significantly to the high mortality rates of the time. The development and use of these surgical instruments reflect the limited medical knowledge of the medieval period. While the intentions behind their creation were often good, to heal and save lives, the reality was far from ideal. Patients faced not only the pain of the procedure itself, but also the very real risk of complications, infections, and death from the use of these crude tools. As we reflect on these medieval surgical instruments, we can appreciate the enormous strides made in medical technology and understanding. The precision, sterility, and effectiveness of modern surgical tools stand in stark contrast to their medieval counterparts. Yet it's worth remembering that these crude instruments were stepping stones on the path to our current medical practices, each iteration bringing us closer to safer, more effective treatment. In the realm of medieval medicine, pain management was a field fraught with both ingenuity and danger. The physicians of this era, lacking our modern understanding of anatomy and pharmacology, often resorted to methods that were as perilous as they were ineffective. One of the most common approaches to pain relief in medieval times was the use of herbal remedies. Monks and herbalists cultivated extensive gardens, growing plants believed to have medicinal properties. Among these, opium poppy was particularly prized for its potent analgesic effects. Medieval herbalists, the milk of the poppy, when dried and prepared correctly, can bring sweet relief to those in the throes of agony. But beware, for its power is great and can easily overwhelm the unprepared. Indeed, while opium was effective in dulling pain, its use was fraught with danger. Dosage was imprecise, and addiction was a common, though poorly understood, consequence. Many a patient found themselves dependent on the drug, their suffering merely masked rather than cured. Another popular pain management technique was the application of heat or cold. Hot stones were often placed on aching joints or muscles, while cold compresses made from snow or ice were used to numb areas before crude surgical procedures. Medieval physicians, for the swelling of joints and the aching of bones, apply heat to drive out the ill humors. But for the fever of infection or the pain of fresh wounds, seek the cooling touch of winter's embrace. While these methods had some merit, they were often applied indiscriminately, sometimes exacerbating the very conditions they sought to alleviate. Burns from overzealous heat application were not uncommon, and the use of unclean ice or snow could introduce infections to open wounds. Perhaps one of the most bizarre pain management techniques of the medieval period was the use of animal-based remedies. It was not unusual for physicians to prescribe concoctions made from various animal parts, believing them to possess pain-relieving properties. Medieval apothecaries, for the relief of headaches, grind the skull of a hanged man into a fine powder and mix it with vinegar. Apply this paste to the temples, and the pain shall subside. Needless to say, such remedies were not only ineffective, but could also be downright dangerous. The use of unsterile animal products often led to infections, and some ingredients, like mercury or lead, were toxic in their own right. Bloodletting, a practice we've discussed earlier, was also employed as a means of pain management. The theory behind this was that pain was caused by an imbalance of the four humors, and by releasing bad blood, balance could be restored, thus alleviating pain. Medieval barber surgeon, when the patient is gripped by pain, we must release the excess blood to restore harmony to the body. The leeches know where to draw the corrupted humors, bringing blessed relief. While bloodletting did sometimes provide temporary relief due to the release of endorphins, it often weakened patients and could lead to dangerous levels of blood loss, particularly in those already debilitated by illness or injury. For dental pain, which was a common affliction in medieval times due to poor oral hygiene, the remedies were particularly crude. Extraction was often the go-to solution, performed without anesthesia using rudimentary tools. Medieval tooth drawer, when a tooth is rotten and causing great distress, with my pliers, I shall grip the offending molar and wrench it from its socket. The pain shall be great, but brief, and relief will soon follow. These dental procedures were excruciatingly painful and carried a high risk of infection. Many people lived with chronic dental pain rather than face the ordeal of extraction. In some cases, medieval physicians attempted to use distraction as a form of pain management. This could involve anything from music and storytelling to more extreme measures like deliberately causing pain in another part of the body to redirect the patient's focus. Medieval nurse, for those in the grip of great pain, we must engage their senses elsewhere. Let us sing hymns to soothe their spirit, or if need be, pinch their limbs to draw their attention from the greater hurt. While distraction techniques can indeed have some effect on pain perception, they were hardly a substitute for effective analgesics. Moreover, the practice of inflicting additional pain often served only to increase the patient's overall suffering. For women in labor, pain management options were particularly limited. Childbirth was seen as a necessary suffering, often viewed through a religious lens as the curse of Eve. Midwives might offer herbal teas or recommend specific positions to ease discomfort, but effective pain relief was largely unavailable. Medieval midwife, in the throes of childbirth, we can offer little but words of encouragement and the strength of our hands. The pain is great, but it is the way of all women, a trial to be endured with faith and fortitude. This lack of adequate pain management during childbirth contributed to the high maternal mortality rates of the medieval period. Many women dreaded pregnancy not just for the risks it posed to their lives, but for the ordeal of labor itself. It's worth noting that not all pain management techniques in medieval times were entirely without merit. Massage, for instance, was sometimes employed to relieve muscle aches and tension. While not always performed with great skill, this practice at least had the benefit of being relatively harmless. Medieval healer: to ease the aching of tired muscles, we must knead the flesh as a baker kneads dough. With firm hands and soothing oils, we can coax the pain from weary limbs. Similarly, the use of certain herbal remedies did have some basis in effective pharmacology. Willow bark, for example, contains salicin, a compound similar to modern aspirin. While medieval physicians didn't understand the chemical reasons for its effectiveness, they had observed its pain-relieving properties. However, these glimpses of effective treatment were the exception rather than the rule. For the most part, pain management in medieval times was a hit-or-miss affair, often causing as much suffering as it alleviated. The inadequacy of pain management during this era had far-reaching consequences. Chronic pain could render individuals unable to work or participate in society, leading to poverty and isolation. The fear of pain associated with medical procedures often prevented people from seeking treatment until their conditions had become severe or life-threatening. Moreover, the lack of effective pain relief meant that many surgical procedures, when attempted, had to be performed with great speed. This rush often led to mistakes and complications that could have been avoided with better pain management techniques. It wasn't until the development of modern anesthetics in the 19th century that significant progress was made in the field of pain management. The ability to render patients unconscious or numb during procedures revolutionized medicine, allowing for more complex and careful surgeries. As we reflect on the struggles of medieval pain management, we can appreciate the advances of modern medicine. While pain remains a challenging aspect of human experience, we now have a wide array of tools and techniques to address it, from precise pharmaceutical interventions to holistic approaches that consider the mind-body connection. The journey from the crude and often harmful pain management practices of medieval times to our current understanding has been long and marked by countless breakthroughs and setbacks. It serves as a testament to human ingenuity and the relentless pursuit of knowledge in the face of suffering. As we delve deeper into the world of medieval medicine, we must consider how medical practitioners acquired their knowledge. The path to becoming a physician in the Middle Ages was vastly different from what we know today, and often resulted in questionable practices and dangerous misconceptions. Medical education in medieval times was a curious blend of ancient wisdom, religious doctrine, and superstition. The foundations of medical knowledge were primarily based on the works of ancient Greek and Roman physicians, particularly Hippocrates and Galen. These texts were revered almost as sacred documents, and their teachings were rarely questioned or challenged. In the early medieval period, most medical education took place in monasteries. Monks were often the keepers of medical knowledge, preserving and copying ancient texts. However, their understanding was limited by religious constraints and a lack of practical experience. The Church's influence on medicine was significant, often leading to the belief that illness was a result of sin or demonic possession. As universities began to emerge in the 12th and 13th centuries, medical education slowly started to shift from monasteries to these new centers of learning. The first medical school in the Western world was established in Salerno, Italy, in the 9th century. It became a model for other medical schools that would later emerge across Europe. The curriculum at these early medical schools was heavily theoretical. Students spent years studying ancient texts, engaging in debates, and memorizing long passages from medical treatises. Practical experience was often limited, and dissections were rare due to religious and cultural taboos surrounding the handling of human corpses. A typical medical education in a medieval university would begin with the study of the liberal arts, including grammar, logic, and rhetoric. This was followed by more specialized medical studies, which could take up to 10 years to complete. The aspiring physician would study anatomy, physiology, pathology, and therapeutics, all based on ancient texts and theories. One of the most influential texts used in medieval medical education was the Canon of Medicine by the Persian physician Avicenna. This comprehensive work covered various aspects of medicine and remained a standard textbook in European medical schools until the 18th century. However, its reliance on ancient theories meant that many of its teachings were outdated or simply incorrect. The study of anatomy was particularly problematic in medieval medical education. Due to the scarcity of human dissections, students often relied on animal anatomy or purely theoretical description. This led to numerous misconceptions about the human body that persisted for centuries. For example, many medieval physicians believed that the human liver had 5 lobes based on observations of animal livers. Practical training, when it did occur, was often in the form of apprenticeships. Young aspiring physicians would follow experienced practitioners, observing their methods and gradually taking on more responsibilities. However, this system also perpetuated many of the flawed practices and beliefs of the time. One of the most curious aspects of medieval medical education is the emphasis on astrology. Many universities required physicians to study astrology as part of their medical training. It was believed that the positions of celestial bodies influenced human health, and that certain medical procedures should only be performed when the stars were in favorable alignment. The use of uroscopy, or the examination of urine, was another key component of medieval medical education. Students were taught to diagnose a wide range of conditions based on the color, smell, and even taste of a patient's urine. While this practice did occasionally yield useful information, it was often based more on superstition than actual medical knowledge. Bloodletting, one of the most infamous practices of medieval medicine, was a central part of medical education. Students were taught the intricate theories behind the practice, including the belief in the 4 humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. They learned complex systems for determining when and where to perform bloodletting based on the patient's symptoms and astrological signs. Herbal medicine was another important aspect of medieval medical education. Students were required to memorize lengthy lists of plants and their supposed medicinal properties. While some of these remedies were indeed effective, many were based on folklore or misunderstandings about human physiology. As medical education evolved, so did the professional standards for physicians. By the late medieval period, many cities required aspiring doctors to pass examinations and obtain licenses before they could practice. However, these standards were often inconsistent and poorly enforced, allowing many untrained or poorly trained individuals to continue practicing medicine. It's important to note that formal medical education was not the only path to becoming a healer in medieval times. Many practitioners, particularly in rural areas, learned their craft through family traditions or local customs. These folk healers often combined practical knowledge of herbal remedies with religious or superstitious practices. The limitations of medieval medical education had far-reaching consequences. The rigid adherence to ancient texts and theories stifled innovation and prevented the development of more effective treatments. It would take centuries of scientific advancement and a fundamental shift in how medical knowledge was acquired and validated before medical education began to resemble what we know today. As we reflect on the state of medical education in medieval times, we can appreciate the enormous strides that have been made in our understanding of the human body and the practice of medicine. The journey from the superstition-laden classrooms of medieval universities to the advanced medical schools of today is a testament to human curiosity and the relentless pursuit of knowledge. As we delve deeper into the peculiar world of medieval medicine, we encounter a practice that might make you grateful for modern diagnostic techniques. Imagine a time when your doctor's primary tool for diagnosis was a flask of your urine. Welcome to the fascinating and slightly unsettling realm of uroscopy. Uroscopy, the practice of visually examining urine to diagnose illnesses, was a cornerstone of medieval medicine. Physicians of the time believed that urine held the key to understanding the body's internal workings. They would scrutinize the color, consistency, and even taste of urine to determine what ailed their patients. Picture this: you're feeling unwell in 14th century Europe. You visit the local physician, who greets you not with a stethoscope or thermometer, but with a clear glass flask. This isn't just any flask, it's specially designed for urine examination, called a matula. The physician expectantly holds out this matula, waiting for you to provide a sample. Once you've obliged, the real show begins. The physician holds the matula up to the light, squinting and examining it from every angle. They might swirl it around, watching how it moves. They're looking for specific qualities that they believe correspond to different ailments. The color of urine was particularly important in this medieval diagnostic technique. Physicians had elaborate color charts, not unlike modern paint swatches, to compare against the patient's sample. Each hue was thought to indicate a specific condition or imbalance in the body. For instance, clear, pale urine might suggest a cold condition or an excessive phlegm. On the other hand, dark, reddish urine could indicate a fever or an excess of blood. yellow urine with a greenish tinge, that might be diagnosed as an imbalance of yellow bile, one of the four humors believed to govern health in medieval medical theory. But color wasn't the only factor. The consistency and cloudiness of the urine were also carefully observed. Thick, cloudy urine might be interpreted as a sign of impurities in the blood or problems with digestion. Clear, thin urine could suggest kidney issues or excessive drinking of water. Now brace yourself for this next part. Some particularly dedicated or perhaps misguided physicians would go so far as to taste the urine. Yes, you heard that correctly. They believed that the taste could provide additional clues about the patient's condition. Sweet-tasting urine, for example, might indicate what we now know as diabetes. It's worth noting that while this practice seems bizarre and unscientific to us today, it wasn't entirely without merit. Modern medicine recognizes that urine can indeed provide valuable diagnostic information. Conditions like diabetes, kidney problems, and certain infections can alter the characteristics of urine in ways that are detectable through various tests. However, the medieval approach to uroscopy was far from precise. The interpretations were often based on a mix of observation, superstition, and the prevailing medical theories of the time, which we now know were frequently incorrect. The practice of uroscopy became so popular that it led to some interesting social phenomena. Wealthy patients would sometimes send servants to the physician with flasks of their urine, believing the doctor could diagnose them without even seeing them in person. This led to a thriving trade in urine flasks and even instances of urine theft or substitution by those hopping to receive a more favorable diagnosis. Physicians specializing in uroscopy gained considerable prestige. They would often be depicted in medieval art holding up a flask of urine, examining it with intense concentration. This image became something of a symbol for medical knowledge and expertise in medieval society. However, as with many aspects of medieval medicine, uroscopy had its critics even in its heyday. Some physicians argued that it was being overused and that some practitioners were making wild, unfounded claims based solely on urine examination. They argued for a more holistic approach to diagnosis, considering other symptoms and the patient's overall condition. Despite these criticisms, uroscopy remained a dominant diagnostic tool throughout the medieval period and even into the early modern era. It wasn't until the advent of more scientific approaches to medicine in the 17th and 18th centuries that uroscopy began to lose its central place in medical practice. Today, while we still use urine tests as part of medical diagnostics, they're far more sophisticated and are typically just one part of a comprehensive examination. Modern urinalysis involves chemical tests and microscopic examination, providing precise information about various aspects of a person's health. As we reflect on the practice of uroscopy, it's easy to chuckle at the idea of a doctor earnestly peering into a flask of urine, believing it held all the secrets of a patient's health. But it's also a reminder of how far medical science has come and how much we've learned about the human body and the nature of disease. In many ways, uroscopy represents the medieval approach to medicine as a whole, a mixture of keen observation, misguided theories, and a genuine desire to understand and heal the human body. While we may look back on these practices with a mix of amusement and horror, they were important steps on the long journey towards modern medical understanding. As we close this chapter on uroscopy and medieval diagnosis, let's take a moment to appreciate the advancements in medical science that allow us to receive more accurate diagnoses today. The next time you provide a urine sample for a medical test, you can be grateful that your doctor won't be holding it up to the light or, heaven forbid, taking a taste. In medieval times, the understanding and treatment of mental illness was vastly different from our modern approach. Let's delve into the often misguided and sometimes terrifying methods used to address mental health issues during this period. Mental illness in the Middle Ages was frequently attributed to supernatural causes. Many believed that individuals suffering from mental disorders were possessed by demons or under the influence of malevolent spirits. This misconception led to treatments that were more focused on exorcism than actual medical care. One common practice was trepanation, a procedure where a hole was drilled into the skull of the patient. This was believed to release evil spirits or relieve pressure on the brain. Imagine the excruciating pain and danger involved in such a primitive surgical procedure, often performed without anesthesia or proper sanitation. Another widespread belief was that mental illness could be cured through pilgrimage. Patients were encouraged to embark on long, arduous journeys to holy sites, hoping for miraculous healing. While the change of scenery and physical activity might have provided some relief, it was far from a comprehensive treatment. In some cases, individuals with mental illnesses were subjected to harsh physical treatments. This could include being chained to walls in dark, damp cells or confined to primitive asylums. The conditions in these institutions were often deplorable, with patients receiving little to no actual care or attention. Bloodletting was another common treatment for various ailments, including mental disorders. The theory was that an imbalance of bodily fluids or humors caused mental illness. By draining blood, practitioners believed they could restore this balance. However, this practice often weakened patients further and could lead to dangerous infections. Some medieval doctors prescribed herbal remedies for mental illnesses. While some of these might have had mild sedative effects, others were potentially harmful or even toxic. Concoctions made from plants like henbane or mandrake were used, despite their dangerous properties. In certain regions, people believed that bathing in or drinking from holy wells could cure mental illness. While the placebo effect might have provided some relief, these practices did little to address the underlying issues and could sometimes lead to waterborne diseases. The use of restraints was commonplace in dealing with mentally ill individuals, especially those deemed violent or unpredictable. Patients might be bound with ropes, chains, or even primitive straitjackets. This practice often exacerbated their condition and led to physical injuries. Some treatments involved shock therapy, but not in the controlled medical sense we might think of today. Patients might be suddenly dunked into cold water or subjected to loud noises in the belief that it would shock them back to sanity. These methods were more likely to traumatize than to heal. In some cases, mental illness was seen as a form of divine punishment or a test of faith. This led to treatments involving intense prayer sessions, fasting, and other religious practices. While spiritual comfort might have helped some, it did little to address the medical aspects of mental disorders. The concept of moral treatment began to emerge towards the end of the medieval period. This approach emphasized treating patients with kindness and respect, engaging them in meaningful activities, and providing a calm, structured environment. While still far from modern standards, it was a step in the right direction. It's important to note that not all treatments were universally cruel or misguided. Some medieval Islamic hospitals, for instance, provided more humane care for the mentally ill, including music therapy and early forms of occupational therapy. However, for the most part, the treatment of mental illness in medieval times was a blend of superstition, religious beliefs, and misunderstood medical theories. Patients often suffered greatly, subjected to treatments that we now recognize as ineffective at best and torturous at worst. The stigma associated with mental illness during this period was immense. Many individuals were ostracized from their communities, labeled as witches or heretics, and subjected to social isolation that only worsened their condition. It wasn't until the Renaissance and the Age of Enlightenment that more scientific approaches to mental health began to emerge. The work of pioneers like Philippe Pinel in the late 18th century started to shift the paradigm towards more humane and effective treatments. As we reflect on these medieval practices, we can appreciate the enormous strides made in the field of mental health care. Modern psychiatry, while still evolving, offers treatments based on scientific research and a deeper understanding of the human mind. The contrast with medieval methods serves as a stark reminder of how far we've come in our approach to mental health. As we venture deeper into the grim realities of medieval medicine, we find ourselves on the blood-soaked battlefields of Europe. Here, amidst the chaos and carnage of war, a different kind of medical practice emerged, one born of necessity and desperation. Battlefield medicine in medieval times was a far cry from the sophisticated trauma care we see today. In fact, it was often as dangerous as the battles themselves. Let's explore the harrowing world of medieval combat healthcare, where survival was as much a matter of luck as it was of skill. First, we must understand the nature of medieval warfare. Battles were brutal, close-quarters affairs, with soldiers wielding swords, axes, maces, and polearms. Injuries were severe and often catastrophic. Crushed limbs, deep lacerations, and puncture wounds were commonplace. In this environment, the role of the battlefield medic was both crucial and perilous. These brave individuals, often monks or barber surgeons, would risk their lives to tend to the wounded in the midst of battle. They carried simple tools, knives, saws, needles, and an assortment of herbs and poultices. One of the most common procedures on the battlefield was amputation. With limited knowledge of infection and no effective means of treating complex fractures or severe tissue damage, removing the affected limb was often seen as the best chance for survival. Imagine, if you will, the scene. A soldier lies writhing in agony, his leg mangled by a mace. The battlefield surgeon approaches, assessing the situation quickly. There's no time for careful deliberation or sophisticated diagnostics. The decision is made in seconds. The leg must go. The process was as brutal as it was swift. The surgeon would use a tourniquet to stem the blood flow, then, with a few deft strokes of a saw, remove the limb. The raw stump would be cauterized with a red-hot iron to seal the blood vessels, a procedure that was agonizing but necessary to prevent immediate blood loss. Pain management during these procedures was primitive at best. Strong alcohol was sometimes used to dull the senses, but more often than not, patients endured these surgeries fully conscious. The screams of the wounded undergoing such treatments added to the cacophony of battle. Another common battlefield injury was arrow wounds. Unlike the clean punctures of modern bullets, arrows could cause extensive internal damage and were notoriously difficult to remove. Medieval surgeons developed specialized tools for arrow extraction, including long-handled forceps and screw-like devices to grip the arrowhead. However, removing an arrow was a delicate process. If the arrowhead was barbed, pulling it out could cause even more damage. In such cases, surgeons would sometimes push the arrow all the way through the body, breaking off the shaft and pulling it out from the other side, a procedure that was as risky as it sounds. Infection was a constant threat on the medieval battlefield. With no understanding of germ theory, wounds were often treated with substances that we now know to be harmful. Wine was commonly used to clean wounds, which unknowingly did have some antiseptic properties, but so were less beneficial substances like egg yolks or a mixture of oil and rose petals. One particularly gruesome treatment for deep wounds was the use of boiling oil. Surgeons would pour this scalding liquid directly into the wound, believing it would cleanse and cauterize simultaneously. While this certainly killed any bacteria, it also destroyed healthy tissue and caused excruciating pain. The concept of triage, prioritizing treatment based on the severity of injuries, was in its infancy during this period. Often, decisions about who to treat were based more on the social status of the wounded than on medical need. A knight with a minor injury might receive attention before a common foot soldier with life-threatening wounds. Despite these harsh realities, some advancements in battlefield medicine did occur during the medieval period. The Crusades, for all their brutality, led to increased contact between European and Arabic medical traditions, resulting in the exchange of knowledge and techniques. For instance, Arab physicians were more advanced in their understanding of human anatomy and surgical techniques. They introduced the use of catgut for internal stitching, a practice that was adopted by European surgeons and continued well into the modern era. The Crusades also saw the rise of dedicated military orders that combined fighting prowess with medical care. The Knights Hospitaller, for example, established a network of hospitals and developed more organized systems for treating the wounded both on and off the battlefield. As firearms began to appear on European battlefields in the later medieval period, battlefield surgeons faced new challenges. Gunshot wounds were different from anything they had encountered before, deep, prone to infection, and often containing fragments of the projectile or clothing. Initially, many surgeons believed that gunpowder itself was poisonous and that these wounds required special treatment. This led to the practice of cauterizing gunshot wounds with boiling oil, a treatment that was eventually proven unnecessary and harmful by the French surgeon Ambroise Paré in the 16th century. Paré's contributions to battlefield medicine marked the beginning of a shift towards more evidence-based practices. He advocated for gentler treatments, including the use of soothing balms instead of cauterization for certain wounds. His work laid the foundation for the development of modern trauma care. As we reflect on the brutal realities of medieval battlefield medicine, we can appreciate the incredible advancements that have been made in emergency medical care. Today's combat medics, with their advanced training and equipment, stand in stark contrast to their medieval counterparts. Yet in the courage and dedication of those early battlefield surgeons, we can see the seeds of modern medical ethics and practices. Despite their limited knowledge and resources, these individuals risked their lives to save others, laying the groundwork for the sophisticated trauma care we have today. As we close this chapter on battlefield medicine, let the vivid images of medieval combat fade from your mind. Allow the tension in your body to release, knowing that you are safe and far removed from the harsh realities we've explored. Let your breathing slow and your thoughts drift as we prepare to journey into our next segment of medieval medical history. As the Black Death ravaged Europe in the 14th century, medieval societies desperately sought ways to contain the spread of this devastating plague. One of the most significant developments in public health during this time was the concept of quarantine. The word quarantine itself comes from the Italian 40 giorni, meaning 40 days, which was the length of time ships were required to remain isolated before passengers and crew could go ashore during the height of the Black Death pandemic. The practice of quarantine began in the bustling port city of Venice in 1348. Venetian officials, realizing the connection between the arrival of ships and the spread of the plague, implemented a system where incoming vessels had to anchor for 40 days before landing. This period was chosen based on the belief that it took 40 days for the disease to either manifest symptoms or for the infected individuals to die. While this practice may seem primitive by today's standards, it was a revolutionary step in medieval medicine and public health. The Venetian model quickly spread to other Mediterranean ports and eventually across Europe. Cities began to establish dedicated quarantine stations, often on nearby islands or in isolated areas outside city walls. One of the most famous quarantine stations was the Lazaretto Vecchio, an island in the Venetian lagoon. Established in 1423, it served as a hospital and quarantine center for plague victims and suspected cases. The island was equipped with lodgings, a church, and burial grounds. Patients were separated based on their condition, with the most severe cases isolated from those showing milder symptoms or merely suspected of infection. As quarantine practices evolved, so did the methods of identifying potentially infected individuals. In many European cities, plague doctors were tasked with examining travelers and local residents for signs of the disease. These doctors wore distinctive protective gear, including long leather coats, gloves, boots, and a beak-like mask filled with aromatic herbs. The herbs were thought to purify the air and protect the doctor from miasma, the believed cause of the plague. The enforcement of quarantine was often brutal and uncompromising. In some cities, entire households would be locked inside their homes if one member showed symptoms of the plague. Guards were posted outside to ensure no one entered or left. Food and other necessities were delivered through windows or over walls. These harsh measures, while causing immense suffering, were seen as necessary to protect the broader community. Quarantine practices weren't limited to cities and ports. Rural communities also developed their own methods of isolation. In some cases, entire villages would cut themselves off from the outside world, and plague was reported in nearby areas. The English village of Iam in Derbyshire is perhaps the most famous example of this self-imposed quarantine. In 1665, when plague arrived in Iam by a bundle of infected cloth from London, the village's rector, William Mompesson, convinced the villagers to quarantine themselves to prevent the disease from spreading to neighboring communities. For 14 months, no one entered or left Iam. Supplies were left at the village boundary by outsiders, and money to pay for these goods was left in vinegar-filled holes to disinfect the coins. The sacrifice of Iam was enormous. Out of a population of around 800, 260 villagers died. However, their self-imposed quarantine succeeded in preventing the spread of plague to the surrounding areas. This act of collective sacrifice became legendary and is still commemorated in Iam to this day. As quarantine practices became more widespread, they also became more sophisticated. Cities began to develop complex systems for managing potential outbreaks. In Milan, for instance, officials created a color-coded system to mark houses. A white cross indicated a house under suspicion, while a red cross meant confirmed plague cases were present. This system allowed for more targeted quarantine measures and helped officials allocate resources more effectively. The development of lazarettos, or plague hospitals, was another important aspect of medieval quarantine practices. These facilities, often located on the outskirts of cities or on nearby islands, served as isolation wards for the sick and potentially infected. The name lazaretto comes from the biblical figure Lazarus, who was associated with leprosy and became a patron saint of lepers. One of the most elaborate lazarettos was the Lazaretto Nuovo in Venice, built in the 15th century. This facility was designed not just for isolating the sick, but also for disinfecting goods. Ships arriving in Venice would have their cargo unloaded and spread out in the lazaretto's vast warehouses. The goods would then be exposed to the air and sun, a process believed to purify them of contagion. While these quarantine measures were often effective in slowing the spread of disease, they also had significant social and economic impacts. Trade was severely disrupted, leading to shortages of goods and economic hardship. The isolation of individuals and families could be psychologically devastating, and the fear of being quarantined sometimes led people to hide their symptoms or flee infected areas, inadvertently spreading the disease further. Despite these challenges, the concept of quarantine represented a major shift in how medieval society approached public health. It was one of the first systematic attempts to control the spread of disease through social distancing and isolation. These practices laid the groundwork for modern epidemiology and public health measures. As we reflect on these medieval quarantine practices, it's important to recognize both their brutality and their effectiveness. While the methods were often harsh and based on incomplete understanding of disease transmission, they nonetheless played a crucial role in managing outbreaks and saving lives. The lessons learned during these dark times continue to inform our approach to disease control today, reminding us of the enduring importance of public health measures in the face of widespread illness. As we delve deeper into the murky waters of medieval medicine, we encounter a fascinating realm of folk remedies. These were the go-to solutions for the common folk who couldn't afford or access the services of trained physicians. Often passed down through generations, these remedies ranged from the somewhat sensible to the utterly bizarre. Let's start with a relatively benign remedy, the use of honey. While modern science has confirmed honey's antibacterial properties, medieval people didn't understand the science behind it. They just knew it worked. Yawning honey was often applied to wounds to prevent infection. It was also mixed with various herbs to create soothing teas for sore throats and coughs. In fact, some of these honey-based remedies are still used today in traditional medicine. Moving on to more peculiar treatments, let's talk about the use of leeches. Yes, those slimy, blood-sucking creatures were once considered a cure-all for various ailments. The theory was that by removing bad blood, leeches could restore balance to the body's humors. Soft chuckle, imagine going to your local healer with a headache, only to have them suggest attaching leeches to your temples. It's a far cry from reaching for a bottle of aspirin, isn't it? But leeches were just the tip of the iceberg when it came to unusual remedies. How about wearing a live pigeon, split in half, on your feet to cure the plague? Yes, you heard that right. Some medieval folk believed that the warmth of the dying bird would draw out the illness from the body. Yawning, speaking of the plague, another popular folk remedy was to carry around a pocket full of sweet-smelling herbs or to wear a beak-like mask stuffed with aromatic substances. The idea was to ward off the bad air that was believed to cause the disease. While it didn't actually prevent the plague, it probably made the overwhelming stench of medieval cities a bit more bearable. For those suffering from kidney stones, a common and excruciatingly painful condition in medieval times, one folk remedy suggested drinking a concoction made from the ashes of burnt hedgehogs. Imagine the poor hedgehogs sacrificed in the name of this questionable cure. Soft sigh, another intriguing remedy was the use of moss that grew on human skulls to treat nosebleeds. This moss, creepily called usnea, was believed to have powerful styptic properties. The fact that it grew on human remains probably added to its perceived magical qualities. For skin conditions like eczema or psoriasis, people might turn to a paste made from crushed snails. While it sounds revolting, snail mucus does actually contain compounds that can be beneficial for the skin. Modern cosmetic companies have even started incorporating snail extracts into their products. Who knew our medieval ancestors were so ahead of their time? Yawning, moving on to dental care, which was practically non-existent in medieval times, people often resorted to some truly cringeworthy remedies for toothaches. One such remedy involved holding a frog against the cheek, or even putting a live frog's head in your mouth. The belief was that the frog would absorb the pain and the disease. For those suffering from gout, a painful form of arthritis, one folk remedy suggested wrapping the affected area in the skin of a freshly killed puppy. It's hard to imagine how anyone thought this would help, but desperation often led people to try the most outlandish cures. Soft chuckle, another peculiar remedy was the use of spider webs to stop bleeding. While it might sound completely far-fetched, spider silk does actually have some hemostatic properties. However, the medieval application was far from sterile and probably caused more harm than good in many cases. For those plagued by warts, a common folk remedy was to rub them with a piece of meat and then bury the meat. As the meat rotted in the ground, it was believed that the wart would disappear. This is a classic example of sympathetic magic, where an action performed on one object is believed to affect another object. Yawning, let's not forget about the various charms and amulets that were popular in medieval times. People would wear stones, herbs, or even written prayers around their necks to ward off diseases. While these had no real medical value, they might have provided some psychological comfort. One particularly interesting charm was the witch bottle. This was a container filled with the person's urine, along with nails, pins, and hair. It was believed to trap evil spirits or curses that might be causing illness. These bottles were often buried under the threshold of a house for protection. Soft sigh for those suffering from jaundice, a yellow discoloration of the skin caused by liver problems. One folk remedy suggested wearing yellow clothing. The idea was that the yellow clothes would draw out the yellow from the body. This is another example of sympathetic magic at work. In some cases, folk remedies crossed over into the realm of the supernatural. For instance, to cure epilepsy, it was believed that drinking water from the skull of a suicide victim could help. This macabre remedy highlights the desperation of people facing chronic, poorly understood conditions. Yawning, another supernatural remedy, involved the Hand of Glory, which was the pickled hand of a hanged criminal. It was believed to have various magical properties, including the ability to cure diseases. Thankfully, this particular remedy wasn't very common due to the difficulty of obtaining the main ingredient. For those suffering from a fever, one folk remedy suggested tying a bag of live spiders around the neck. The idea was that as the spiders died, they would take the fever with them. It's hard to imagine how uncomfortable this must have been for both the patient and the unfortunate spiders. Soft chuckle, let's not forget about the various uses of urine in folk medicine. Urine was believed to have curative properties and was used in everything from treating wounds to whitening teeth. Some people even drank their own urine as a general health tonic. While this might sound disgusting to us, it was a common practice in many cultures throughout history. As we wrap up our exploration of medieval folk remedies, it's important to remember that these practices weren't just random acts of desperation. They were part of a complex system of beliefs about health and the body that had been passed down through generations. Yawning, while many of these remedies seem bizarre or even harmful to us now, they represent our ancestors' attempts to understand and control their health in a world where medical knowledge was limited and life was often short and painful. In the end, these folk remedies serve as a fascinating window into the medieval mindset, showing us how people coped with illness and injury in a time before modern medicine. They remind us of how far we've come in our understanding of health and disease, but also of the enduring human desire to find meaning and hope in the face of suffering. As we delve deeper into the murky waters of medieval medicine, we encounter a particularly fascinating aspect, the state of anatomical knowledge during this period. Our modern understanding of the human body, with its intricate systems and complex functions, would have been utterly alien to the medical practitioners of the Middle Ages. In medieval times, the human body was largely a mystery, shrouded in misconceptions and superstitions. The prevailing theories about anatomy were often based on ancient texts, particularly those of the Greek physician Galen, whose works have been translated into Latin and Arabic. While Galen's contributions were significant for his time, many of his ideas were flawed or incomplete. One of the most significant limitations in medieval anatomical knowledge was the lack of systematic human dissection. The church generally frowned upon the practice, considering it a desecration of the human body. This taboo severely hampered the advancement of medical knowledge. Instead, physicians relied heavily on animal dissections, particularly pigs, which were thought to be anatomically similar to humans. This reliance on animal anatomy led to numerous misconceptions. For instance, medieval doctors believed that the human liver had 5 lobes, just like a pig's liver. They also thought that the uterus had 7 chambers, a belief that persisted for centuries. These errors were compounded by the fact that Galen's texts, which formed the basis of medical education, contained similar inaccuracies. The medieval understanding of the circulatory system was particularly flawed. Doctors believed in the theory of the 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. They thought that these humors flowed through the body in a way that's completely different from our modern understanding of blood circulation. The concept of the heart pumping blood through arteries and veins was unknown. Instead, they believed that the liver was the source of blood, which then flowed to the heart and was distributed throughout the body. They thought that blood was consumed by the organs and tissues rather than circulating continuously. This misunderstanding led to practices like bloodletting, which we'll discuss in more detail later. The brain, too, was poorly. The nervous system was a complete mystery, with nerves often confused with tendons or ligaments. The concept of neurons and synapses was centuries away from being discovered. Medieval anatomists also had peculiar ideas about the female reproductive system. They believed in the concept of the wandering womb, thinking that the uterus could move around the body, causing various ailments. This belief led to treatments that aimed to lure the womb back to its proper place, often using pleasant or unpleasant smells. The skeletal system was perhaps better understood, as bones were more easily observable. However, the functions of many organs remained a mystery. The kidneys, for example, were thought to be the seat of conscience and decision-making, rather than organs of filtration and waste removal. Despite these limitations, some progress was made during the medieval period. In the Islamic world, physicians like Ibn al-Nafis made important discoveries, including an early description of pulmonary circulation. However, these advancements were slow to spread to Europe. In Europe, one of the first to challenge the anatomical status quo was Mondino de Luzzi, an Italian physician who performed public dissections in the early 14th century. His textbook, Anatomia, became a standard reference for anatomical study, though it still contained many of Galen's errors. It wasn't until the Renaissance, with anatomists like Andreas Vesalius, that a more accurate understanding of human anatomy began to emerge. Vesalius's work, based on actual human dissections, corrected many of the errors that had persisted for over 1,000 years. The limited anatomical knowledge of the medieval period had profound implications for medical practice. Without a clear understanding of how the body worked, diagnoses were often based on superficial symptoms or superstitious beliefs. Treatments, as a result, were frequently ineffective or even harmful. For instance, the misunderstanding of the digestive system led to the belief that illnesses could be purged from the body through induced vomiting or diarrhea. This resulted in the widespread use of emetics and laxatives, often causing more harm than good. The lack of knowledge about infection and the immune system meant that wounds were often treated in ways that we now know increased the risk of infection. The concept of germs was unknown, and the importance of cleanliness in medical procedures was not without a clear understanding of internal structures. Surgeries were extremely risky affairs. Surgeons often had to rely on external landmarks and guesswork when operating, leading to high mortality rates. It's important to note that while we may look back on medieval anatomical knowledge with a sense of superiority, the physicians of the time were working with the best information available to them. They were constrained not only by technological limitations, but also by cultural and religious factors that restricted the advancement of anatomical study. As we drift off to sleep, let's reflect on how far our understanding of the human body has come. From the mystical beliefs of the four humors to the precise imaging techniques of modern medicine, the journey of anatomical discovery is a testament to human curiosity and perseverance. In our next segment, we'll explore how this limited anatomical knowledge influenced the bizarre and often terrifying medical treatments of the medieval period. As we delve deeper into the world of medieval medicine, we cannot overlook the importance of medical texts and manuscripts. These written works were the foundation of medical knowledge during this era, preserving and transmitting information from generation to generation. One of the most influential medical texts of the medieval period was the Canon of Medicine by Ibn Sina, also known as Avicenna. This comprehensive medical encyclopedia, written in the 11th century, became a standard medical text in medieval universities and remained influential for centuries. Ibn Sina's work was so revered that it was translated from Arabic into Latin and other European languages, allowing its knowledge to spread throughout the Western world. The Canon of Medicine covered various aspects of health and disease, including anatomy, physiology, and pharmacology. Another significant text was the Trotula, a collection of medical writings traditionally attributed to Trotta of Salerno, a female physician from the 11th or 12th century. This work focused on women's health and gynecology, providing insights into medieval understanding of female anatomy and reproductive health. The Trotula addressed topics such as menstruation, conception, pregnancy, and childbirth. It also included recipes for various remedies and cosmetics, reflecting the holistic approach to women's health in medieval times. In England, the Leech Book of Bald was a prominent Old English medical text from the 9th century. This manuscript contained a collection of remedies for various ailments, combining elements of Anglo-Saxon folk medicine with classical medical knowledge. The Leech Book included treatments for common conditions such as headaches, fevers, and skin diseases. It also contained charms and incantations, highlighting the blend of practical medicine and supernatural beliefs that characterized medieval healthcare. Moving to the Islamic world, the Al-Tasrif by Abu al-Qasim al-Zahrawi, known as Apothecaries in the West, was a monumental 30-volume medical encyclopedia. Written in the 10th century, it covered a wide range of medical topics with a particular focus on surgery. Apothecaries' work was groundbreaking in its detailed descriptions of surgical procedures and instruments. Many of the tools he described and illustrated were his own inventions, demonstrating the innovative spirit of medieval Islamic medicine. In the realm of herbal medicine, the herbarium of Pseudo-Apuleius was widely circulated in medieval Europe. This illustrated guide to medicinal plants, dating back to the 4th or 5th century, provided detailed information on the uses and preparation of various herbs. The herbarium was not only a practical guide for physicians and herbalists, but also a work of art. Many copies were beautifully illustrated, with intricate drawings of plants that served both educational and aesthetic purposes. Another significant herbal text was the De Materia Medica by Dioscorides, a Greek physician from the 1st century AD. Although written much earlier, this work remained influential throughout the medieval period and was frequently copied and translated. Dioscorides' text described over 600 medicinal plants and their uses, forming the basis of much of medieval pharmacology. Its influence extended far beyond Europe, with versions produced in Arabic, Syrian, and other languages. In the 12th century, the Regimen Sanitatis Salernitanum, or Salernitan Rule of Health, emerged from the medical school of Salerno in Italy. This poetic work, written in Latin verse, provided practical advice on diet, hygiene, and general health maintenance. The regimen was unique in its accessibility, using simple language and memorable rhymes to convey medical knowledge to a broader audience. It covered topics such as the humoral theory, the benefits of various foods, and the importance of moderation in all things. As we move into the later medieval period, we encounter the works of Hildegard of Bingen, a 12th century German Benedictine abbess. Her medical writings, including Physica and Causi et Curi, combined traditional medical knowledge with her own mystical visions and experiences. Hildegard's works were notable for their holistic approach to health, emphasizing the interconnectedness of the physical, spiritual, and natural worlds. She described the medicinal properties of plants, animals, and minerals, as well as the influence of celestial bodies on human health. In the 13th century, the Chirurgia Magna by Guy de Chauliac became a standard surgical text. This comprehensive work, based on both classical sources and de Chauliac's own experience, covered a wide range of surgical procedures and techniques. De Chauliac's text was notable for its practical approach, providing detailed instructions for various operations and emphasizing the importance of anatomy in surgical practice. It remained influential well into the Renaissance period. As the medieval period progressed, medical texts began to incorporate more illustrations and diagrams. The Wound Man illustrations, which appeared in various surgical treatises from the 14th century onward, are a prime example of this trend. These striking images depicted a human figure covered in various wounds and ailments, with accompanying text describing the appropriate treatments. The Wound Man served as a quick reference guide for surgeons and physicians, combining visual and textual information in a novel way. It's important to note that the production and dissemination of these medical texts was a labor-intensive process. Manuscripts were painstakingly copied by hand, often in monastic scriptoria, and the most valuable works were beautifully illuminated. The scarcity and value of these manuscripts meant that medical knowledge was often concentrated in certain centers of learning, such as universities and monasteries. This centralization of knowledge contributed to the development of formal medical education in medieval Europe. As we conclude our exploration of medieval medical texts and manuscripts, we can appreciate the rich tapestry of knowledge they represent. These works reflect not only the medical understanding of their time, but also the cultural, religious, and philosophical contexts in which they were created. From the comprehensive encyclopedias of Ibn Sina and Abulcasis to the practical guides of the Salernitan school, these texts shaped the practice of medicine for centuries. They serve as a testament to the intellectual curiosity and dedication of medieval scholars and physicians who sought to understand and alleviate human suffering in an era of limited scientific knowledge. While Europe was grappling with the Dark Ages, the Islamic world was experiencing a golden age of scientific and medical advancement. This period, known as the Islamic Golden Age, lasted from the 8th to the 14th centuries and had a profound impact on the development of medicine. One of the most influential figures in Islamic medicine was Abu Bakr Muhammad ibn Zakaria al-Razi, also known as Rhazes in the West. Born in 854 CE in Persia, Rhazes was a polymath who made significant contributions to various fields, including medicine, philosophy, and alchemy. Rhazes was known for his empirical approach to medicine. He emphasized the importance of observation and clinical experience over blind adherence to ancient texts. This revolutionary approach laid the groundwork for evidence-based medicine that we practice today. One of Rhazes' most notable works was the Comprehensive Book on Medicine, a massive medical encyclopedia that compiled knowledge from Greek, Syrian, Indian, and Persian sources. This book became a standard medical text in both the Islamic world and Europe for centuries. Rhazes also made significant contributions to the understanding of smallpox and measles. He was the first physician to clearly distinguish between these two diseases, providing detailed descriptions of their symptoms and progression. His work on smallpox and measles remained the definitive treatise on these diseases until the 19th century. Another towering figure in Islamic medicine was Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna. Born in 980 CE in what is now Uzbekistan, Ibn Sina was a child prodigy who memorized the entire Quran by the age of 10 and mastered philosophy, logic, and mathematics by 18. Ibn Sina's magnum opus was the Canon of Medicine, a comprehensive medical encyclopedia that synthesized Greek, Persian, and Arabic medical knowledge. This work was so influential that it remained the standard medical textbook in Europe until the 18th century, over 700 years after it was written. The Canon of Medicine introduced several innovative concepts. For instance, Ibn Sina was one of the first to recognize that tuberculosis was contagious, that diseases could spread through water and soil, and that emotions could affect the body's health. Ibn Sina also made significant contributions to pharmacology. He described over 760 drugs and their effects on the body, many of which are still used in modern medicine. He also introduced the concept of clinical trials, emphasizing the importance of testing medicines before using them on patients. The Islamic world also made significant advancements in surgical techniques. One of the most famous surgeons of the Islamic Golden Age was Abu al-Qasim al-Zahrawi, known in the West as Abulcasis. Born in 936 CE in Al-Andalus, now part of modern Spain, al-Zahrawi is often referred to as the father of modern surgery. Al-Zahrawi's most famous work was Al-Tasrif, a 30-volume medical encyclopedia that included a significant section on surgery. This work described over 200 surgical instruments, many of which al-Zahrawi invented himself. Some of these instruments, such as the forceps, retractor, and surgical scissors, are still used in modern surgical practices. Al-Zahrawi was also the first to describe ectopic pregnancy, a potentially life-threatening condition where a fertilized egg implants outside the uterus. He provided detailed instructions on how to perform craniotomy and lithotomy, procedures that were far ahead of their time. The Islamic world also made significant contributions to the development of hospitals. The first hospital in the Islamic world was built in Baghdad in the 9th century, and it quickly became a model for other hospitals throughout the Islamic Empire. These hospitals were remarkably advanced for their time. They were divided into different wards for various diseases, had separate sections for men and women, employed full-time physicians and pharmacists, and even had libraries and lecture halls for medical education. One of the most famous hospitals was the Adudi Hospital in Baghdad, founded in 981 CE. It had a staff of 24 physicians, including specialists in areas such as ophthalmology, surgery, and orthopedics. The hospital also had a pharmacy and a library containing thousands of books on medicine and other sciences. Islamic hospitals were also pioneers in maintaining detailed patient records. These records included the patient's symptoms, treatments, and outcomes, providing valuable data for medical research and education. The influence of Islamic medicine extended far beyond the borders of the Islamic world. As European scholars began to translate Arabic medical texts into Latin, this knowledge gradually made its way into European medical practice. One of the most important centers for this translation movement is the city of Toledo in Spain. After the Christian reconquest of Toledo in 1085, the city became a melting pot of Christian, Muslim, and Jewish scholars who worked together to translate Arabic texts into Latin. These translations had a profound impact on European medicine. They introduced European physicians to new drugs, surgical techniques, and medical theories that had been developed in the Islamic world. This influx of knowledge helped to revitalize European medicine, which had stagnated during the Dark Ages. The influence of Islamic medicine can still be seen in modern medical practice. Many medical terms in English have Arabic origins, such as alcohol, alkali, and elixir. The symbol Rx used in prescriptions is believed to be derived from the Arabic word al-kasba, meaning recipe. As we reflect on the contributions of Islamic medicine to the development of modern medical practice, it's clear that the progress of science and medicine is a collective human endeavor. The advancements made during the Islamic Golden Age built upon earlier Greek and Roman knowledge, and in turn laid the foundation for the scientific revolution in Europe. This legacy reminds us of the importance of cross-cultural exchange and the power of preserving and building upon knowledge across generations. As we continue to face new medical challenges in the modern world, we can draw inspiration from this rich history of innovation and collaboration. In the shadowy realm of medieval medicine, superstition often held as much sway as science. The line between medical treatment and mystical ritual was blurred, leading to some truly bizarre practices that we'll explore in this segment. One of the most prevalent superstitions was the belief in the power of relics. These were often body parts or possessions of saints, thought to possess miraculous healing properties. Pilgrims would travel great distances to touch or even ingest small fragments of these holy objects. For instance, the shroud of Saint Audrey was believed to cure throat ailments. Pilgrims would wrap strips of cloth around their necks, mimicking the saint's legendary necklace, in hopes of curing their affliction. Another peculiar superstition involved the king's touch. It was widely believed that monarchs possessed the divine ability to cure scrofula, a type of tuberculosis affecting the lymph nodes. Sufferers would line up to be touched by the king, hoping for a miraculous recovery. This practice persisted for centuries, with English and French monarchs regularly performing the ritual. King Charles II of England is said to have touched over 90,000 people during his reign, a testament to the enduring power of this superstition. The concept of sympathetic magic also played a significant role in medieval medical practices. This belief system suggested that objects with similar characteristics could influence each other. For example, the doctrine of signatures proposed that plants resembling certain body parts could be used to treat ailments in those areas. Following this logic, walnuts, with their brain-like appearance, were thought to be beneficial for treating head ailments. Similarly, the red juice of bloodroot was believed to be effective in treating blood disorders. Astrological beliefs also heavily influenced medieval medicine. Many physicians consulted star charts before diagnosing or treating patients. They believed that different parts of the body were governed by different celestial bodies, and that the positions of these heavenly objects could affect health and disease. For instance, it was thought that the moon governed the brain, Jupiter the liver, and Venus the reproductive organs. Doctors would often time their treatments to coincide with what they believed to be favorable astrological conditions. This led to the creation of complex medical almanacs, which combined astrological predictions with health advice. These texts would indicate the best days for bloodletting, administering medicines, or performing surgeries based on the positions of the stars and planets. Another widespread superstition was the belief in the evil eye. This was the idea that some individuals possessed the power to cause harm or misfortune simply by looking at someone. To protect against this perceived threat, people would wear amulets or carry talismans. One popular protective charm was the coral necklace, often seen in medieval paintings of infants and young children. The red color of the coral was thought to ward off the evil eye and protect the wearer from illness and misfortune. The number 3 was considered particularly powerful in medieval superstition. Many remedies and rituals involved performing actions 3 times or using 3 ingredients. This belief was likely influenced by the Christian concept of the Holy Trinity. For example, a common folk remedy for warts involved rubbing the affected area with a piece of meat on 3 consecutive nights, then burying the meat. As the meat decayed, it was believed the wart would disappear. Animal-based remedies were also prevalent in medieval superstitious medicine. Various animal parts were thought to possess healing properties, often based on the animal's perceived characteristics or behaviors. For instance, owl eyes were believed to improve night vision, while eating wolf meat was thought to cure madness. The heart of a stag was considered a cure for cardiac problems, likely due to the animal's reputation for speed and endurance. One particularly gruesome superstition involved the use of corpse medicine. This was the belief that the body of a recently deceased person contained powerful healing properties. People would attend public executions to collect blood or body parts for medicinal use. Perhaps the most famous example of corpse medicine was mummy powder. This involved grinding up mummified human remains and ingesting them as a cure-all. This practice persisted well into the 18th century, leading to a thriving trade in Egyptian mummies. The power of words and incantations was another significant aspect of medieval medical superstitions. Many treatments involved reciting specific prayers or magical formulas, often combining Christian elements with older pagan traditions. For example, to cure a toothache, one might recite a charm invoking Saint Peter and asking the pain to depart in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. These verbal remedies were often used in conjunction with physical treatments. The concept of miasma, or bad air, was a pervasive superstition that influenced medieval medical practices. It was believed that diseases were spread by foul odors or vapors. This led to the use of strong-smelling herbs and spices in medicine, and the infamous plague doctor masks filled with aromatic substances. During times of epidemic, people would carry pomanders, perforated containers filled with fragrant herbs and spices, believing they would ward off disease. Streets were often fumigated with burning herbs in an attempt to purify the air. The influence of the moon on human health was another widely held superstition. Many believed that certain illnesses waxed and waned with the lunar cycle. Epilepsy, in particular, was often referred to as the lunar disease due to this association. These superstitions, while often ineffective or even harmful from a modern medical perspective, served important psychological and social functions in medieval society. They provided explanations for otherwise mysterious ailments and offered hope in the face of limited medical knowledge. As we drift off to sleep, let's reflect on how far medical science has come since these times of superstition and mysticism. While some of these beliefs may seem quaint or even ridiculous to us now, they were once accepted as truth by many. It's a reminder of the ever-evolving nature of human knowledge and the importance of scientific inquiry in shaping our understanding of health and medicine. As the flickering candlelight casts long shadows across the stone walls of a medieval monastery, we turn our attention to the role of monastic medicine in the Middle Ages. These bastions of faith were not just centers of spiritual devotion, but also crucial hubs of medical knowledge and practice. Monasteries, with their commitment to scholarship and service, became the primary custodians of medical texts from ancient Greece and Rome. Monks painstakingly copied and preserved these works, ensuring that the wisdom of Hippocrates and Galen survived through the centuries. But monastic medicine was more than just preservation of knowledge. It was a unique blend of spiritual and physical healing. The monks believed that illness was often a manifestation of sin, and that true healing required both bodily and spiritual remedies. In the quiet solitude of monastery gardens, herbs were cultivated with great care. These medicinal plants formed the backbone of monastic pharmacology. Lavender for headaches, chamomile for sleep, and sage for digestion were just a few of the natural remedies grown within the monastery walls. The infirmary, a dedicated space within the monastery for treating the sick, was a place of both hope and trepidation. Here, monks would tend to their brethren and sometimes to lay people from the surrounding community. One of the most famous monastic medical practitioners was Hildegard of Bingen, a 12th century Benedictine abbess. Her works on natural history and medicinal uses of plants were groundbreaking for their time. She believed in the concept of viriditas, or the healing power of nature, which influenced her approach to medicine. Hildegard wrote, "Tea narrator, but not all monastic treatments were so gentle or forward-thinking. Bloodletting, a practice inherited from ancient medicine, was commonly performed in monasteries. Monks believed that by releasing bad blood, they could restore the body's balance of humors. The process was often carried out using leeches, which were kept in special jars in the infirmary. The sight of these writhing creatures must have been unsettling to patients already weakened by illness." Another common treatment in monastic medicine was trepanation, the practice of drilling a hole in the skull to relieve pressure or release evil spirits. While this sounds horrifying to modern ears, it was considered a legitimate medical procedure at the time. Monastic medical texts often included detailed illustrations of this procedure, showing the circular piece of skull being removed. One can only imagine the fear and pain experienced by patients undergoing such a treatment. Despite these more extreme practices, monastic medicine also made significant contributions to patient care. The rule of Saint Benedict, which governed many monasteries, emphasized the importance of caring for the sick as if they were Christ himself. This led to the development of what we might recognize as the first hospitals in Western Europe. These infirmaries provided not just medical treatment, but also shelter, food, and spiritual comfort to the sick and dying. The daily routine in a monastic infirmary was rigorous. Patients were cared for around the clock, with monks taking turns to ensure constant attention. Prayers were an integral part of the healing process, often recited at regular intervals throughout the day and night. One particularly intriguing aspect of monastic medicine was the use of holy relics in healing. These objects, believed to have belonged to saints or to have miraculous properties, were sometimes applied to the sick in hopes of a cure. Imagine the scene: a feverish patient lying in a dimly lit infirmary, while a solemn monk carefully places a small bone fragment or piece of cloth, purportedly from a saint, on their forehead. The air thick with incense and the murmur of prayers, as everyone present hopes for a miraculous recovery. While we might scoff at such practices today, it's important to remember the power of belief in the healing process. The comfort and hope provided by these rituals may have had real psychological benefits for patients. Monastic medicine also made significant contributions to our understanding of anatomy. Some monasteries conducted autopsies, despite the general taboo against interfering with the dead. These examinations, often performed in secret, helped to advance medical knowledge. However, this pursuit of knowledge could be dangerous. Monks who pushed the boundaries of accepted practice risked accusations of heresy or witchcraft. The line between medicine and magic was often blurry in medieval minds. One area where monastic medicine truly excelled was in the treatment of wounds and injuries. The Crusades had provided ample opportunity for monks to develop their skills in this area, and many became expert in cleaning and dressing wounds to prevent infection. They used honey, known for its antibacterial properties, to dress wounds. Wine was used to clean injuries, its alcohol content helping to sterilize the area. These practices, while not fully understood at the time, were remarkably effective. As we near the end of our exploration of monastic medicine, it's worth reflecting on its legacy. Many of the herbs first cultivated in monastery gardens are still used in modern medicine. The emphasis on patient care and the establishment of hospitals have shaped our current healthcare system. Yet, as with all aspects of medieval medicine, monastic healing practices were a mix of the practical and the mystical, the helpful and the harmful. They represent a crucial link in the chain of medical history, preserving ancient knowledge while laying the groundwork for future advancements. As the candle burns low and the monastery settles into its nightly silence, we leave behind the world of monastic medicine. Its echoes can still be heard in the halls of modern hospitals and in the pages of medical texts, a testament to the enduring impact of these medieval healers. As we delve deeper into the murky waters of medieval medicine, we cannot ignore the complex and often troubling realm of medical ethics during this period. While the concept of medical ethics as we know it today didn't exist in the Middle Ages, there were still some rudimentary guidelines and moral considerations that shaped the practice of medicine. One of the most fundamental ethical principles in medieval medicine was the Hippocratic Oath. Although not universally adopted, this ancient Greek text still influenced many practitioners. The oath emphasized the importance of patient confidentiality, avoiding harm and acting in the patient's best interest. However, the interpretation and application of these principles varied widely in medieval times. For instance, the concept of do no harm was often overshadowed by the belief that aggressive treatments were necessary to combat illness. Bloodletting, which we discussed earlier, was a prime example of this. Despite the potential risks and discomfort it caused patients, physicians genuinely believed it was beneficial and therefore ethically sound. The issue of consent in medieval medicine was particularly problematic. Patients often had little say in their treatment, especially if they were of lower social status. Physicians, who were typically from the upper classes, would make decisions based on their own judgment and the patient's ability to pay, rather than considering the patient's wishes or concerns. This leads us to another ethical quandary of medieval medicine, the disparity in healthcare access. While the wealthy could afford the services of trained physicians and the most advanced treatments of the time, the poor often had to rely on folk remedies, local healers, or the charity of religious institutions. This stark inequality in healthcare was accepted as a natural part of the social order, raising ethical questions that we still grapple with today. The role of religion in medieval medicine also presented ethical challenges. Many believed that illness was a form of divine punishment or a test of faith. This led to treatments that focused on spiritual healing rather than addressing physical symptoms. While this approach could provide comfort to some patients, it often meant neglecting potentially effective medical interventions. Moreover, the Church's influence on medical practice sometimes conflicted with scientific advancement. Dissections, for example, were often frowned upon or outright banned, hindering anatomical understanding and medical progress. This tension between religious doctrine and medical knowledge created ethical dilemmas for practitioners who sought to advance their understanding of the human body. Another ethical issue in medieval medicine was the treatment of mental illness. Those suffering from mental health conditions were often viewed as possessed by demons or as witches. This led to cruel and inhumane treatments, such as exorcisms, isolation, or even execution. The lack of understanding and compassion for mental illness represents one of the darkest chapters in medieval medical ethics. The practice of surgery in medieval times also raised ethical concerns. Surgeons, who were often separate from physicians and considered of lower status, performed procedures with limited anesthesia and high risk of infection. The decision to undergo surgery was often a life-or-death gamble, and the ethical implications of performing such dangerous procedures were not always fully considered. Experimentation and innovation in medicine, while crucial for advancement, also posed ethical challenges. Without standardized clinical trials or informed consent protocols, new treatments were often tested on patients with little regard for safety or efficacy. The line between legitimate medical innovation and dangerous experimentation was blurry at best. The treatment of women in medieval medicine deserves special attention from an ethical standpoint. Women were often excluded from formal medical education and practice, relegated to roles as midwives or herbalists. This gender-based discrimination not only limited the pool of medical knowledge, but also affected the quality of care women received, especially in matters of reproductive health. Childbirth, for instance, was a particularly perilous event in medieval times. The ethical dilemmas faced by midwives and physicians during difficult births were immense. In cases where both the mother's and child's lives were at risk, practitioners had to make heart-wrenching decisions with limited medical knowledge and resources. The concept of medical confidentiality, while mentioned in the Hippocratic Oath, was not always strictly observed in medieval practice. Physicians might share details of a patient's condition with family members or employers without the patient's consent, particularly if the illness was considered contagious or morally questionable. As medical knowledge slowly advanced during the later Middle Ages, new ethical questions emerged. The growing understanding of anatomy and physiology challenged long-held beliefs about the body and soul, leading to philosophical and ethical debates about the nature of life, death, and medical intervention. The ethical considerations surrounding end-of-life care in medieval times were particularly complex. With limited pain management options and a strong religious influence, the approach to caring for the dying often focused more on spiritual preparation than physical comfort. The concept of euthanasia, while not formally recognized, was debated by some scholars of the time. As we reflect on the ethical landscape of medieval medicine, it's important to remember that many of these issues continue to resonate in modern healthcare debates. While our understanding of medicine has advanced tremendously, questions of access, consent, experimentation, and the balance between physical and spiritual care remain relevant. In conclusion, the realm of medical ethics in medieval times was as complex and multifaceted as the practice of medicine itself. From issues of consent and access to the influence of religion in the treatment of vulnerable populations, the ethical challenges faced by medieval practitioners laid the groundwork for many of the bioethical debates we continue to grapple with today. As we move forward in our exploration of medieval medicine, let's carry with us this understanding of the ethical complexities that shaped medical practice in this fascinating era. As we delve deeper into the annals of medieval medicine, we cannot overlook the significant role that women played in this field. Despite the patriarchal nature of medieval society, women were often at the forefront of medical care, particularly in areas that were considered more feminine in nature. Midwifery was perhaps the most prominent area where women dominated. Childbirth was almost exclusively the domain of women, with male physicians rarely involved unless complications arose. Midwives were highly respected members of their communities, possessing knowledge passed down through generations of practical experience. These women were not just present for the act of birth itself. They provided care and advice throughout pregnancy, assisted with postnatal recovery, and often acted as general healthcare providers for women and children. Their expertise extended to areas such as fertility, contraception, and various women's health issues. However, it's important to note that the role of midwives was not without controversy. As medical knowledge became more formalized and male-dominated universities began to produce physicians, there were increasing attempts to regulate and sometimes suppress midwifery practices. Beyond midwifery, women also played crucial roles as herbalists and healers. Many monasteries and convents had infirmaries where nuns tended to the sick, both within their religious communities and often for the general public as well. These women were skilled in the preparation of herbal remedies and the basic medical practices of the time. One notable figure in this realm was Hildegard of Bingen, a 12th century Benedictine abbess. Hildegard wrote extensively on medicine, documenting the use of various plants and minerals for healing. Her works, such as Physica and Causi et Curi, were significant contributions to medieval medical literature. Women healers in secular society, often referred to as wise women or cunning folk, were also common. These individuals, usually operating in rural areas, combined practical medical knowledge with elements of folk tradition and sometimes what we might today call alternative medicine. Their practices often included a mixture of herbal remedies, minor surgeries, bone setting, and sometimes elements of mysticism or magic. While their methods might seem questionable by modern standards, these women often provided the only accessible health care for many in their communities. However, the position of these women healers was often precarious. As formal medical education became more established and male-dominated, there were increasing efforts to delegitimize and even criminalize the practices of unofficial female healers. This tension would eventually culminate in the witch hunts of the early modern period, where many women with medical knowledge were persecuted. It's worth noting that while women were largely excluded from formal medical education in universities, there were exceptions. In the famous medical school of Salerno, Italy, women were allowed to both study and teach medicine. The most renowned of these was Trotula of Salerno, who lived in the 11th or 12th century. Trotula is credited with writing several important medical texts, particularly focusing on women's health. Her works, collectively known as the Trotula, were widely circulated and remained influential for centuries. They covered topics such as menstruation, conception, pregnancy, and childbirth, as well as general health and beauty advice for women. The Trotula texts are notable not just for their medical content, but also for their compassionate approach to women's health issues. They advocated for gentler treatments and showed a deep understanding of the physical and emotional aspects of women's health that was often lacking in male-authored medical texts of the time. Another area where women played a significant role in medieval healthcare was in the care of lepers. Leprosy was a greatly feared disease in medieval Europe, and those afflicted were often isolated in leper houses or colonies. Many of these institutions were run by religious orders, and nuns frequently took on the task of caring for lepers. This work was considered both dangerous and spiritually meritorious. The nuns who undertook this care risked their own health, but were seen as following in the footsteps of saints who administered to lepers. Their duties included not just medical care, but also providing for the physical and spiritual needs of those under their charge. As we approach the end of the medieval period, we see a gradual shift in the role of women in medicine. The rise of universities and the increasing professionalization of medicine began to push women to the margins of formal medical practice. However, their contributions continue to be significant, particularly in areas such as midwifery and nursing. The legacy of these medieval women in medicine is complex. On one hand, their work laid important foundations for future developments in areas like obstetrics and gynecology. On the other hand, the suppression of their practices and knowledge represents a significant loss in the history of medicine. As we reflect on the role of women in medieval medicine, it's important to recognize both their contributions and the challenges they faced. Their story is one of resilience, practical wisdom, and dedication to healing, often in the face of significant societal and institutional obstacles. In many ways, the tensions and debates surrounding women's roles in healthcare during the medieval period foreshadowed issues that would continue to be relevant for centuries to come. The struggle for recognition, the balance between traditional and formal medical knowledge, and the gendered nature of certain medical specialties are themes that have echoed throughout history. As we close this chapter on women in medieval medicine, we're reminded of the complex and often overlooked roles that women have played in the development of medical knowledge and practice. Their stories serve as a testament to the enduring human drive to heal and care for others, regardless of the obstacles faced.
This segment is shorter than required. 02240 words. Please expand content to match the 0014. 00 duration.